The world we know today feels mapped, measured, and explained. Satellites orbit overhead, GPS charts every road, and digital maps stretch across oceans and mountains. But beyond the surface of certainty, there are places where silence reigns, and mysteries refuse to fade. For centuries, explorers, scientists, and wanderers have vanished into deserts, jungles, and seas, leaving behind journals that stop mid-sentence, ships abandoned in perfect order, and skeletal remains scattered in places no one was meant to survive. From the frozen expanses of the Arctic to the depths of Siberia's lakes, from ancient ruins that whisper of lost civilizations to modern aircraft that vanish without a trace, the world holds stories that remain unsolved, even under the sharpest scrutiny of science. Tonight, we'll journey through 40 of the strangest true accounts ever recorded. Stories of ships found drifting with meals uneaten, of cities swallowed by sea and sand, of artifacts that should not exist. Each tale begins with fact, a date, a name, a place, but ends with silence, where answers dissolve into speculation. Stay with this story until the end, because the further we go, the more you'll realize the most disturbing mysteries are not found in legends, they are hidden in the pages of history itself. In 1915, Ernest Shackleton's expedition watched helplessly as the ship Endurance was crushed by Antarctic ice. For months, they survived on drifting floes. But when the wreck was rediscovered in 2022, lying 10,000 feet below the Weddell Sea, it looked eerily preserved, timbers intact, nameplates still legible, as if time itself had paused beneath the ice. The story begins 7 years earlier, in 1914, when Shackleton, already famed for his near-successful attempt to reach the South Pole with the Nimrod expedition, set out with a new ambition. His plan was audacious: to cross the entire Antarctic continent by land, from the Weddell Sea to the Ross Sea, nearly 1,800 miles of uncharted ice. The vessel chosen was the Endurance, a 3-masted barquentine, specially reinforced for polar service. Built in Norway in 1912, her hull was over 21 inches thick at the beam, with oak and greenheart timbers layered for maximum strength. At 144 feet long and 300 tons, she was considered among the most robust wooden ships of her day. Yet even this was no match for the Weddell Sea. Its waters are infamous among sailors, a place where shifting pack ice can exert pressures exceeding 1,000 pounds per square inch. By January 1915, Endurance had become trapped in the ice. Her engines were cut, sails furled, and the men could only watch as the frozen sea carried their ship with it. For months, they lived aboard, treating the stranded vessel as a drifting camp. But as autumn set in, the grip of the ice intensified. By October, ominous groans echoed through the hull as enormous slabs of pack ice buckled her timbers. Shackleton's journal recorded, "She is slowly giving up her life." On October 27th, 1915, the inevitable came. The hull splintered with a sound likened to gunfire. Seams opened, water poured in, and the crew abandoned ship. They salvaged tents, food, sledges, and navigational instruments before the Endurance sank beneath the ice, swallowed whole by the black waters of the Weddell Sea. The men were left stranded on shifting floes, hundreds of miles from the nearest outpost of humanity. For the next 5 months, Shackleton's crew drifted westward on ice floes, camping in makeshift shelters fashioned from salvaged canvas and wood. Temperatures often plunged to negative 30 degrees Celsius, while the wind whipped across the barren expanse with unrelenting force. They subsisted on seal meat and penguin, supplementing dwindling stores of ship's rations. In April 1916, when the ice floes began breaking apart beneath them, Shackleton made the desperate decision to launch the 3 lifeboats they had managed to save. Over harrowing days of open water rowing, battered by waves and cold spray, they reached the barren shores of Elephant Island. From there, Shackleton and 5 men embarked on one of history's greatest survival voyages, an 800-mile journey in an open boat, the James Caird, across the storm-lashed Southern Ocean to South Georgia. Miraculously, all of his men survived. Shackleton's reputation as a leader who never lost a man was secured. Yet the ship itself, the Endurance, was lost to time. For more than a century, its final resting place remained unknown. Search expeditions were launched, but the Weddell Sea's reputation as the most hostile sea on Earth defeated them. Ice cover, shifting currents, and extreme depths made the wreck nearly impossible to locate. It wasn't until March 5, 2022, that a modern expedition using icebreaker ships and autonomous submersibles finally found her. The wreck lay upright on the seabed at a depth of 3,008 meters, astonishingly well preserved by the near-freezing water and lack of wood-eating organisms. The video footage stunned historians. The hull, though scarred, still bore the name Endurance, clearly carved across the stern. The ship's wheel remained in place, railings intact, portholes unbroken. Even the rigging and deck structures were visible, as though she had settled gently onto the seabed instead of being crushed and buried by ice. Unlike most wrecks, which collapse into twisted fragments, Endurance seemed frozen in a kind of suspended animation. Why the ship survived in such pristine condition remains part of the mystery. Cold water, low oxygen, and the absence of marine wood borers certainly contributed. But some scientists believe the shifting ice itself shielded the wreck, sealing it away in an isolated pocket until modern sonar pierced the dark. The eerie preservation has led many to call it the most beautiful shipwreck ever discovered. Still, one question lingers. Shackleton and his men stood on the ice, watching her disappear in 1915. Today, she rests on the Prossen seabed, untouched by time. But between those two moments, the splintering roar of destruction and the stillness of rediscovery lies a silence no one can yet explain. And beneath the Weddell Sea, what else might remain locked away, waiting for ice and time to give it back? On December 5th, 1945, 5 US Navy Avenger bombers lifted off from Florida's coast on a routine training mission. The weather was calm, the aircraft fully fueled, and the pilots trained. Hours later, their last radio calls spoke of compasses spinning wildly, white water beneath them, and a sky that looked strange. They never returned. It began at 2:10 p.m. when the squadron designated Flight 19 departed from Naval Air Station Fort Lauderdale. The exercise was known as Navigation Problem No. 1, a triangular route over the Atlantic designed to test dead reckoning skills. Each aircraft, a Grumman TBM Avenger, carried enough fuel for about 5 hours of flight. Together, they held 14 men, 13 student aviators, and their leader, Lieutenant Charles Carroll Taylor, a 8-year-old combat veteran who had flown combat missions in the Pacific. For the first 90 minutes, everything proceeded normally. The Avengers flew east, out over open ocean, before banking north to complete the second leg of their triangle. Radio checks with the tower reported no mechanical trouble. But at 3:40 p.m., the tone changed. Taylor's voice broke through the static. "Both my compasses are out. I don't know where we are. We must have gotten lost after the last turn." His words carried an edge of confusion, unusual for an experienced pilot. Controllers back at Fort Lauderdale leaned closer to their headsets. Attempts to triangulate the plane's position were hampered by faint, fading transmissions. Taylor insisted he believed they were over the Florida Keys, yet based on their heading and timing, they were likely hundreds of miles northeast, well into the Atlantic. The men beneath him, still in formation, trusted his judgment. As the minutes ticked by, the transmissions grew more unsettling. At one point, Taylor reported, "We can't tell which way is west. Everything looks strange. The ocean looks white." Ground crews attempted to direct the squadron westward, toward the setting sun. But Taylor hesitated, repeating his uncertainty. The other pilots, some of them trainees, questioned his orders, but ultimately followed his lead deeper into the open sea. By 5 p.m., their fuel reserves were dwindling. Weather reports suggested that conditions had worsened: low clouds, strong winds, and heavy seas building. Radio operators at the tower recorded bursts of frantic chatter. One message cut through the static: "We may have to ditch, unless landfall, when the first plane drops below 10 gallons. We all go down together." Rescue aircraft were scrambled, including a massive PBM Mariner flying boat with 13 crew members aboard. It lifted into the evening sky to begin its search. Within an hour, it too had disappeared. A tanker in the area reported seeing a distant explosion and a column of flame on the horizon. No wreckage was ever recovered from either the Mariner or Flight 19. The search effort that followed was immense. Over 300 aircraft and 21 ships combed 250,000 square miles of ocean. Not a single piece of wreckage was found. No life vests, no rafts, no oil slicks. Official Navy reports struggled for answers. At first, they blamed Taylor's navigational error, suggesting he became disoriented and led his men east instead of west. But even then, questions lingered. How could 5 planes vanish without a trace in shallow coastal waters? Why did no emergency signals or debris surface? Theories grew over time. Some suggested electromagnetic anomalies disrupted their compasses. Others speculated about optical illusions from cloud cover and waves, creating the white water Taylor described. More fringe explanations invoked time slips or even abduction, fueled by the fact that this disappearance occurred within the region later nicknamed the Bermuda Triangle. To this day, the fate of Flight 19 remains one of aviation's great enigmas. The Navy's final report called it simply cause unknown. What is certain is that 27 men left shore that afternoon, 14 aboard the Avengers, 13 aboard their rescue plane, and none returned. Yet perhaps the most haunting detail comes not from the missing pilots, but from the last words carried through the static on that winter evening. "Everything looks wrong, strange. And in the decades since, investigators have wondered what exactly did they see in those final moments over the Atlantic. In 1845, Sir John Franklin's 2 ships vanished in the Arctic while searching for the Northwest Passage. When searchers finally found skeletal remains decades later, some bore unmistakable cut marks. Evidence suggested that starving men may have resorted to cannibalism in the endless polar night. The expedition had begun with optimism. On May 19th, 1845, the ships HMS Erebus and HMS Terror departed Greenhithe, England, carrying 129 officers and crew. Their mission: to chart the elusive Northwest Passage, a sea route connecting the Atlantic and Pacific through the frozen channels of Canada's Arctic archipelago. Both vessels had been reinforced for ice duty, fitted with iron sheathing and even steam engines adapted from old locomotives. Innovations that promised safety in one of the world's most dangerous environments. Their holds carried 3 years' worth of provisions: salted beef, hardtack, preserved soups, and an experimental stock of tinned foods. The last confirmed European sighting came in late July, when a whaling ship encountered the expedition in Baffin Bay, waiting for clear ice conditions. After that, silence. Months turned into years, and no word returned. By 1848, with families desperate for news, the Admiralty dispatched search expeditions. What they eventually uncovered was a grim trail of clues scattered across the frozen wastes. The first breakthrough came in 1850, when searchers found 3 graves on Beechey Island. Wooden markers identified them as John Torrington, William Brain, and John Hartnell, all young men who had perished during the first winter. Their bodies, later exhumed in the 1,980 seconds, were astonishingly well preserved by permafrost. Autopsies revealed signs of pneumonia, tuberculosis, and unusually high levels of lead, likely from solder used to seal the tinned provisions. Malnutrition and poisoning had begun their toll before the ships even disappeared. Further discoveries painted an even darker picture. Inuit oral histories, passed down through generations, described encounters with desperate white men dragging sledges, their lips blackened from frostbite, their minds clouded by hunger. Some accounts spoke of abandoned ships trapped in ice, others of bodies left scattered along the shoreline. These testimonies, initially dismissed by European officials, would later prove tragically accurate. In 1854, explorer John Ray collected Inuit reports of cannibalism among the survivors. Skeletal remains found on King William Island confirmed it decades later. Bones cracked open, cut marks consistent with defleshing, and charred fragments suggesting cooking over makeshift fires. For Victorian Britain, such revelations were unthinkable. Franklin and his men were hailed as national heroes, symbols of British fortitude. To admit they had resorted to cannibalism clashed violently with public sentiment. The Admiralty resisted Ray's findings, but the bones told their own story. The final moments of the expedition remain shrouded in mystery. A note discovered in a cairn at Victory Point, dated April 25, 1848, revealed that Erebus and Terror had become trapped in ice off King William Island in 1846. By then, 24 men were already dead, including Franklin himself. The survivors, led by Captain Francis Crozier, had abandoned the ships, attempting a desperate march south toward the Back River, nearly 1,000 kilometers away. None made it. Their frozen remains were scattered across the barren landscape, silent witnesses to suffering beyond comprehension. In modern times, technology has reopened the case. In 2014, a Canadian search team located the wreck of HMS Erebus in Queen Maud Gulf. 2 years later, HMS Terror was found in Terror Bay, astonishingly intact, resting upright on the seabed. Cabins appeared sealed, dishes stacked neatly, even glass intact. The preservation is so remarkable that archaeologists hope sealed compartments may still hold untouched records, journals, maps, or logs that could finally answer lingering questions. And yet, uncertainty endures. What precisely caused the catastrophic collapse of health? Was lead poisoning the decisive factor? Or was it starvation compounded by scurvy and disease? Why did Crozier and his men abandon ships that, by all appearances, remained seaworthy? And perhaps most unsettling of all, how did 129 men, equipped with the best technology of their day, vanish into the silence of the Arctic night? The Franklin expedition was meant to chart a path through the ice. Instead, it left a trail of scattered bones and a pair of ghostly ships resting on the seabed. Today, divers descend into their frozen corridors with lights and cameras, moving through rooms untouched for over 170 years. But beneath every discovery lies the same lingering dread that some mysteries of endurance and desperation may never be fully explained. And in the silence of King William Island, where the Arctic wind howls across empty graves, the question lingers: what final horrors unfolded in those last days of the lost expedition? 4. The Lost Camp on Mount Everest. In 1924, George Mallory and Andrew Irvine vanished high on Everest's northeast ridge. Decades later, when Mallory's body was discovered at 26,700 feet, his broken ribs and rope injuries told of a violent fall. But his pocket, empty of the photograph of his wife he promised to place on the summit, left one haunting question. Did he reach the top? The saga began in the spring of 1924, when the British Mount Everest expedition set out from Tibet. The mountain, then still unclimbed, was considered the ultimate prize in exploration. Mallory, already famous for his remark, "because it's there," when asked why he sought Everest's summit, was joined by the young Oxford student Andrew "Sandy" Irvine, a skilled engineer who had helped adapt the team's cumbersome oxygen sets. Together, they represented experience and innovation, an unlikely but determined pair. By early June, their small team had established a high camp on the North Col at over 23,000 feet. From there, parties pushed higher, carrying heavy loads of food, stoves, and oxygen cylinders through the thin air. Everest's northeast ridge is a place of constant peril. Knife-edge arates, unstable snowfields, and sudden storms that sweep across from the Tibetan Plateau. The summit, 29,029 feet above sea level, lay tantalizingly close, yet seemed separated by an endless series of obstacles. On June 6th, a team led by Edward Norton attempted the climb without oxygen, reaching an altitude of around 28,126 feet, a record for the time. He returned, frostbitten but alive, proving that the summit might be within reach. For Mallory and Irvine, the next opportunity came on June 8th, 1924. Setting out from Camp the Six at roughly 26,800 feet, they carried primitive oxygen apparatus strapped across their backs, each cylinder weighing more than 30 pounds. Observers from below reported seeing them climbing steadily toward the summit ridge late that morning, and then they vanished into a bank of cloud. The last known sighting came from fellow climber Noel Odell, who reported glimpsing two small black dots moving strongly near the second step, a formidable rock barrier at 28,140 feet. Whether they were ascending or descending, he could not say with certainty. Moments later, the clouds closed in. Mallory and Irvine were never seen alive again for decades. Their disappearance remained one of mountaineering's greatest mysteries. Did they perish on their way up, never reaching the top? Or did they stand on the summit nearly 3 decades before Sir Edmund Hillary and Tenzing Norgay officially claimed the first ascent in 1953? The answer seemed tantalizingly close in 1999, when an American search team discovered Mallory's body on the north face at an altitude of 26,760 feet. Preserved by the cold, his clothing and skin remained eerily intact. Forensic analysis revealed a severe skull fracture, broken ribs, and rope injuries across his torso, suggesting a violent fall while still tied to Irvine. Yet his pack, camera, and diary were missing. Most striking was the absence of a small photograph of his wife, Ruth, which Mallory had promised to leave on the summit. Had he placed it there? Searches for Irvine continue, fueled by speculation that he carried a vest pocket Kodak camera. If recovered, the film might hold a single photograph capable of rewriting mountaineering history. Despite multiple expeditions, his body has never been found, though some climbers report seeing fragments of oxygen sets scattered higher on the slope. What is known is the brutal environment that claimed them. Winds on Everest's upper slopes can exceed 100 miles per hour, and oxygen levels are less than 1/3 of those at sea level. Frostbite sets in within minutes, judgment falters, and the simplest misstep can mean disaster. Mallory and Irvine were pioneers operating on the edge of human endurance, climbing with hobnail boots, wool clothing, and equipment far less advanced than what modern mountaineers rely upon today. Nearly a century later, the question lingers: did George Mallory, driven by a blend of ambition and obsession, step onto the summit of the world in 1924? Did Andrew Irvine, the young engineer, stand beside him in triumph before the mountain claimed them both? Or were they turned back just short of their goal, their final moments spent in desperate struggle against storm, ice, and gravity? The mystery endures because there is no resolution. Only fragments of evidence, scattered bones, and silence on the mountain. Everest keeps her secrets well, and until Irvine's body or camera is found, the debate will never be settled. And perhaps that is the mountain's greatest power, not just in testing human endurance, but in reminding us that some questions, even after 100 years, remain locked in the ice, unanswered. In 1925, legendary explorer Percy Fawcett vanished in the Brazilian Amazon while searching for a lost city he called Z. Last seen entering the dense Mato Grosso with his son and a single companion, Fawcett left behind no remains, only rumors of hostile tribes, jungle fever, or perhaps a civilization that swallowed him whole. Colonel Percy Harrison Fawcett was no ordinary adventurer. Born in 1867, he was a decorated British officer, a skilled surveyor, and a Fellow of the Royal Geographical Society. His reputation was built on decades of grueling expeditions across South America, where he mapped uncharted rivers, charted borders, and survived encounters with piranhas, jaguars, and venomous snakes. Lean and wiry, with piercing eyes and an almost fanatical belief in his own resilience, he seemed impervious to hardship. By the early 20th century, Fawcett became obsessed with rumors of an ancient city hidden deep within Brazil's Mato Grosso region. Drawing from fragments of conquistador accounts, local legends, and archaeological hints, he spoke of a sophisticated pre-Columbian civilization far older than anyone suspected. He called it simply Z. To colleagues, his vision seemed fantastical, yet for Fawcett, Z represented both the pinnacle of exploration and a rebuke to Western assumptions that the Amazon was an untouched wilderness, incapable of sustaining complex societies. In April 1925, at the age of 58, Fawcett embarked on what he believed would be his defining journey. His party was deliberately small. His two-year-old son Jack, Jack's friend Raleigh Rimmel, and a handful of guides and pack animals. Fawcett believed that a small group could move more swiftly and avoid provoking suspicion among indigenous tribes. He carried only the most essential supplies: rifles, machetes, flares, hammocks, salt, and tins of powdered milk. More tellingly, he instructed that if his expedition failed, no large-scale rescue should be attempted. The first weeks went smoothly. Letters sent back described good health, steady progress, and enthusiasm. On May 29, 1925, from the edge of the Upper Xingu region, Fawcett wrote what would be his final dispatch to his wife Nina in England. It carried a note of confidence: "You need have no fear of failure." Days later, his party pressed further into the jungle, following faint indigenous trails. From that moment, they vanished. Months passed with no word. By the end of 1925, anxiety gave way to alarm. Search expeditions were mounted, some organized by newspapers, others by governments, and still more by adventurers hoping to solve the mystery. Many of these rescuers themselves vanished, or were killed in the attempt. The jungle, vast and unforgiving, swallowed them as surely as it had swallowed Fawcett. Over the decades, countless theories emerged. Some accounts claimed Fawcett and his companions were killed by hostile tribes. Others suggested they succumbed to disease, starvation, or exhaustion, their bones long since claimed by the forest. A few more sensational reports spoke of sightings that Fawcett had discovered Z, chosen to remain with its people, and abandoned the outside world. In 1951, bones thought to be Fawcett's were recovered, but testing proved inconclusive. Later, interviews with members of the Kalapalo tribe revealed oral histories describing the arrival of 3 outsiders in 1925. According to these stories, disputes had arisen and violence followed. Yet no definitive evidence linked the accounts to Fawcett's group. Modern archaeology has, however, given some weight to his belief in Z. Satellite imagery and excavations across the Amazon have revealed vast earthworks, roads, and settlement patterns, signs of complex societies once thriving beneath the forest canopy. While no single lost city has been identified, it is now clear that the Amazon was home to civilizations far more advanced than early 20th century science acknowledged. What became of Percy Fawcett remains unsolved. His disappearance is both tragedy and legend, a tale of ambition carried to the edge of the known world. For some, He represents the last of the great imperial explorers, undone by the very wilderness he sought to conquer. For others, he is a visionary who glimpsed truths about the Amazon long before science caught up. The jungle keeps its secrets, and somewhere beyond the rivers and towering trees of Mato Grosso, the answer to force its fate may still lie, whether in an unmarked grave or in the ruins of a city whose stones have yet to see the light of day. 6. The ghost ship Mary Celeste. In December 1872, the brigantine Mary Celeste was discovered drifting between the Azores and Portugal. Her cargo intact, meals half-eaten, and crew vanished without a trace. The lifeboat was gone, but the ship's log stopped abruptly days earlier, leaving no clue why experienced sailors abandoned a perfectly seaworthy vessel. The vessel herself was unremarkable at first glance. Built in Nova Scotia in 1861, she measured just over 100 feet in length and displaced around 280 tons. She was a workhorse of the Atlantic, carrying cargoes of timber, coal, and alcohol across perilous seas. By 1872, she was under the command of Captain Benjamin Briggs, an experienced mariner known for discipline and sobriety. A devoted family man, Briggs brought his wife Sarah and their 2-year-old daughter Sophia aboard for the voyage, a rare inclusion on merchant runs, but a sign of his confidence in the ship's seaworthiness. Alongside them were 7 hand-picked crew members. On November 7th, 1872, the Mary Celeste departed New York bound for Genoa, Italy. Her hold was filled with over 1,700 barrels of industrial alcohol, volatile, but properly stored. Conditions were favorable as she cleared the harbor, and for the next month, no messages of distress or sightings suggested trouble. Then, silence. On December 4th, 1872, the British brig De Gracia, captained by David Morehouse, a friend of Briggs, spotted a vessel drifting erratically about 400 miles east of the Azores. Closing in, they recognized the Mary Celeste. Her sails were set, though poorly trimmed, and she appeared to be moving under partial power. But something was deeply wrong. No one stood at the wheel. No figures moved on deck. A boarding party found the ship eerily intact. The cargo was untouched. The galley contained prepared meals. The captain's cabin was orderly, his clothes neatly stowed. The logbook, however, stopped on November 25th, 9 days earlier, when the ship was recorded near the Azores. The lifeboat was missing, and so were all 10 souls who had sailed from New York. Closer inspection deepened the mystery. There was 3.5 feet of water in the hold, not enough to endanger the vessel, but possibly alarming to the crew. A makeshift sounding rod was found on deck, suggesting attempts had been made to measure the flooding. One of the ship's pumps was dismantled, perhaps damaged. Yet the hull was sound, the cargo secure, and provisions for 6 months remained untouched. Why had they fled? Theories have multiplied ever since. One possibility is a sudden panic. Alcohol vapors leaking from the barrels could have created noxious fumes, leading Briggs to fear imminent explosion. He may have ordered the crew into the lifeboat temporarily, only for them to be separated when the Mary Celeste drifted away. Another explanation points to rogue waves or waterspouts common in the region. A sudden wall of water might have swept the deck, convincing the crew that abandoning ship was the only chance of survival. More sinister speculations have suggested mutiny, piracy, or even foul play by Captain Morehouse, though none were supported by evidence. Admiralty courts examined the case for months before ruling it a genuine mystery. No crime had been committed, but no resolution offered. What makes the Mary Celeste endure is not just the absence of answers, but the atmosphere of her discovery. Imagine stepping onto a silent deck, the wheel turning by itself, a child's toys still in the cabin, meals half-eaten in the galley, and the vast emptiness of the Atlantic all around. It was as though her people had simply stepped off the edge of the world. The ship herself sailed on for years afterward, changing hands until she was finally wrecked off Haiti in 1885. But the story of her ghost voyage never left her. Each new retelling sharpens the same unsettling question. Why did 10 experienced sailors, with everything in their favor, abandon the safety of their vessel for the uncertainty of the sea. And perhaps the most haunting thought of all, somewhere on the endless Atlantic, a small lifeboat once drifted away from a sound ship, carrying 10 souls who vanished into the horizon, never to be seen again. The vanishing village of Lake Anjikuni. In 1930, a Canadian fur trapper reported arriving at an Inuit village on Lake Anjikuni, only to find every hut deserted, food still cooking, sled dogs dead and tethered. Royal Canadian Mounted Police investigated, but no trace of the several hundred residents was ever found. The story begins on a cold November evening, when Joe LaBelle, an experienced fur trapper, trudged through snow along the desolate shores of Lake Anjikuni in Canada's Nunavut territory. He knew the area well. The lake had long been home to Inuit families who fished its waters and hunted the surrounding tundra. LaBelle expected the warmth of firelight, the sound of sled dogs barking, and the smell of smoke drifting from the low-roofed huts. Instead, he was met with silence. According to his later account, the settlement, usually bustling with life, was eerily still. Stepping into the huts, he found meals laid out as though interrupted mid-bite. Pots hung over extinguished fires, clothing and tools were neatly in place, and rifles leaned by doorways. Yet there was not a single person inside. Outside, LaBelle's shock deepened. Several sled dogs lay dead in their harnesses, still tethered, apparently starved despite the proximity of food stores. To LaBelle, who had relied on sled teams himself, this was incomprehensible. He reported his discovery to the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, RCMP, who launched an official investigation. When officers arrived, they too were struck by the abnormality. No signs of struggle, no tracks leading away from the village, and no evidence of disease or attack were present. The villagers, numbering between 25 and 30 families, had simply vanished. Some reports, passed down in retellings, claimed that the RCMP found open graves in the settlement's small burial ground, as though the dead themselves had been disturbed. If true, it added an even darker element. What could explain such a disappearance? The Arctic is a place of extremes, where temperatures plunge below -40 degrees Celsius and storms can rise without warning. It is possible the community had fled in haste, driven by fear of famine, illness, or natural disaster. But the abandoned meals and tethered dogs argue against a planned departure. Others have suggested that hostile groups forced the villagers away, though no tracks, bodies, or subsequent sightings ever supported this. Skeptics note that the story rests almost entirely on secondary reporting. LaBelle's testimony was carried by newspapers, many of which thrived on sensational tales from the frozen north. Some researchers point out that official RCMP records from 1930 are vague, and later statements by officers cast doubt on whether such a large-scale disappearance occurred as described. The tale may have grown in the telling, mixing fragments of truth with folklore, yet Inuit oral traditions add weight to the sense of unease. Elders have long spoken of spirits in the tundra, of lights in the sky that precede disappearances, of figures who come in silence and take people away. Some modern writers have tied the Anjikuni mystery to reports of unusual auroral activity and unexplained lights seen over the Canadian wilderness in the same era. Whether interpreted as natural phenomena, optical illusions, or something stranger, the stories resonate with the chilling details of LaBelle's account. Even with skepticism, one fact remains. The settlement of Anjikuni Lake was real, and it did experience depopulation during the early 20th century, though whether by ordinary migration or something more abrupt is uncertain. For those who accept LaBelle's testimony at face value, the disappearance remains one of the most unsettling cases of mass vanishing ever reported. Nearly a century later, the frozen lake lies quiet, its shores unchanged, the snow covering whatever secrets may linger there. Hunters still pass through, sometimes pausing at the ruins of old encampments. The silence feels heavier in such places, as though the land remembers. And in that silence, The same question echoes through the empty huts. How can an entire community vanish, leaving behind only the traces of lives interrupted and no clue as to where they went? The Nazca lines from the sky. Etched into Peru's desert, colossal geoglyphs, some stretching over 1,000 feet, depict hummingbirds, monkeys, and straight lines that run perfectly parallel for miles. First rediscovered by pilots in the 1922, the purpose of these immense designs remains unknown. Were they astronomical calendars, ritual pathways, or messages visible only from the heavens? The Nazca Desert lies in southern Peru, a barren plateau where the climate is among the driest on Earth. Rainfall averages less than 1 inch per year, and the stony surface, covered by a layer of reddish iron oxide pebbles, conceals a lighter-colored subsoil. By scraping away the dark stones, ancient builders revealed pale earth beneath. The contrast is stark, and in the relentless desert air, the lines have endured for over 1,500 years. First created between 200 BCE and 600 CE, the geoglyphs span nearly 200 square miles. Some are simple lines, stretching for dozens of miles with uncanny straightness. Others form vast geometric shapes, trapezoids, spirals, and zigzags. The most famous, however, are the biomorphic figures: a spider 150 feet long, a monkey with a coiled tail, a condor with a wingspan of over 400 feet, and a hummingbird so finely etched that every feathered line remains sharp even today. What makes them extraordinary is their visibility. Standing at ground level, the lines appear as shallow grooves, often unrecognizable as patterns. Only from above do the designs reveal themselves. This raised a puzzle when pilots flying across Peru in the 1922 first noticed them. To modern eyes, the lines seemed like runways, or perhaps messages designed for aerial viewing. But the Nazca people had no aircraft, no balloons, and no vantage point higher than the surrounding foothills. Why then were they created on such an immense scale? Scholars have proposed numerous explanations. In the 1942, American historian Paul Kosok suggested the lines formed a vast astronomical calendar, pointing to solstice sunrises and star alignments. Later, German mathematician Maria Reich dedicated her life to studying the site, meticulously mapping the geoglyphs and arguing that they were part of a sophisticated system of celestial markers, recording solstices, equinoxes, and the rising points of constellations critical for agriculture. Other theories see the lines as ritual walkways. Archaeologists have noted worn pathways along some figures, suggesting that the Nazca people walked these shapes as part of processions, ceremonies meant to honor deities or call for rainfall in an unforgiving climate. In this view, the act of walking the lines, tracing them with human footsteps, was more important than seeing them from above. Yet not all explanations fit so neatly. Some lines cross over others, layered without apparent concern for a unified design. Others point not to celestial events but toward nearby water sources, hinting that they may have been ritual markers connected to underground aquifers. More speculative voices, of course, suggest something far stranger, that the lines were signals to the gods above, or perhaps to beings not of this earth. What is undeniable is the precision. Many of the straight lines run for miles without deviation, as if laid out with modern surveying tools. Recent studies using drones and satellite imaging have revealed even more figures, including warriors, orcas, and cats, some so faint they had gone unnoticed for centuries. The scale of labor required is staggering. Thousands of people scraping rock under a blistering sun, working with ropes, stakes, and simple tools, yet producing geometric perfection visible only from the sky. Despite decades of research, no single explanation has silenced the mystery. Were the Nazca lines a calendar, a ritual space, or a message? Each new discovery only broadens the puzzle. Even the preservation seems uncanny. The lines have endured not through protection, but through the desert's harsh stillness, where wind and rain almost never disturb the surface. Standing on the plateau today, the silence is absolute. The desert stretches in every direction, empty and timeless. And beneath one's feet lies a design so vast it can only be understood from the sky, a message carved across centuries, still waiting to be fully read. And the question remains, who were these lines meant for those who walked them? Those who watched the skies, or someone far above the earth itself? The vanished expedition of George Donner. In 1846, the Donner Party attempted to cross the Sierra Nevada late in the season. Trapped by blizzards, the group dwindled through starvation, frostbite, and desperate choices. Rescue parties later reported cabins filled with bones, some cracked open for marrow. The mountains had exacted their toll. The group had begun with hope, not horror. In the spring of 1846, nearly 90 pioneers, families, farmers, and children set out from Illinois for California. They traveled by wagon train, following the Oregon Trail westward through plains and deserts. Their leaders, George Donner and James Reed, were respected, and their destination was a land of promise. At the time, California, then part of Mexico, was a remote but fertile frontier. The journey was arduous even under the best of conditions, but the Donner Party made a fateful decision. In Wyoming, they chose to take the newly promoted Hastings Cutoff, an untested shortcut recommended by guidebooks of the day. It promised to save 300 miles. Instead, it led them into brutal terrain. The wagons crawled through Utah's Wasatch Mountains, then across the Great Salt Lake Desert, where the heat was blistering, water scarce, and oxen collapsed in the alkali dust. The detour cost them precious weeks. By the time they reached Nevada, it was October. The Sierra Nevada loomed ahead, jagged peaks already coated in early snow. The pioneers pressed on, hoping to clear the passes before winter set in. But on October 28, 1846, a massive snowstorm sealed their fate. Drifts rose as high as 20 feet, blocking the passes and trapping the emigrants near what is now Donner Lake. The party hastily constructed makeshift cabins from logs and canvas. Families huddled inside as snow piled against the walls. Winds howled through the trees, and game animals vanished from the frozen woods. Provisions dwindled quickly. The salted beef and flour meant for months was gone within weeks. Oxen, once the lifeblood of the wagons, were slaughtered for food. When their carcasses froze solid, the survivors boiled hides into a gelatinous paste. As weeks turned to months, starvation set in. Children's cries filled the night. Adults grew weak, their limbs swollen from frostbite. By December, a desperate subgroup known as the Forlorn Hope attempted escape on snowshoes, trudging west through blizzards in search of help. Of the 15 who set out, only 7 staggered into California settlements weeks later. The others perished in the snow, some consumed by their companions. Back at Donner Lake, conditions worsened. George Donner, already ill, weakened further. His wife Tamsin refused to leave him, though she had opportunities to escape with relief parties. Her loyalty became legend, though it cost her life. In the camps, survivors later admitted what outsiders had only whispered. When the dead could no longer be buried, their bodies became sustenance for the living. Rescue parties arriving in February and March 1847 found grisly scenes. Cabins littered with bones, some cracked open for marrow. Human remains mingled with ox hides and scraps of clothing. Of the original 87 emigrants, only about 48 survived to reach California. Most of the dead were women, children, and the elderly. The ordeal left scars not just on the survivors, but on the young nation itself. The tale of the Donner Party became both cautionary and sensational, proof of the perils of westward expansion and a symbol of endurance in the face of impossible odds. Historians have debated ever since whether the catastrophe was inevitable. Had they not taken Hastings' cutoff, they might have crossed the Sierra in time. Had they moved more swiftly or carried greater stores, the disaster might have been averted. Yet the mountains are unforgiving, and even small miscalculations proved fatal. Today, at Donner Lake in California, a monument stands where the emigrants built their cabins. Visitors walk beneath towering pines and gaze at snowy peaks, trying to imagine the horror of that winter. The silence of the place is heavy, broken only by the sound of wind in the trees. And beneath that silence lingers the most unsettling truth. Survival often demands choices beyond imagination, and the line between humanity and desperation is thinner than we like to believe. The Dighton Rock Petroglyphs. In Massachusetts, a boulder covered in carvings has puzzled scholars for centuries. Some inscriptions appear Native American, others Norse, and still others resemble early Portuguese. Despite centuries of study, the true origin of the mysterious marks remains undeciphered. The stone itself is unassuming at first glance. Known simply as Dighton Rock, it is a dark, slanted boulder of crystalline sandstone measuring roughly 11 feet long, 5 feet high, and 5 feet wide. It once rested half submerged in the mud of the Taunton River, near the town of Berkeley, Massachusetts. When the tide rolled in, the inscriptions disappeared beneath the waterline, only to re-emerge at low tide like a half-forgotten message. The carvings have been known for centuries. In 1680, Reverend John Danforth sketched the strange symbols, making one of the earliest records of the petroglyphs. His drawings reveal lines, geometric shapes, and what appear to be human figures and animals. Over the centuries, scholars, explorers, and even politicians offered competing interpretations, each colored by the ideas and ambitions of their time. Some argued the carvings were the work of Native Americans, specifically the Algonquin peoples who lived in the region for thousands of years. Indigenous oral traditions do speak of symbolic markings left on stone, meant to record events or spiritual visions. Yet others found the designs too unusual to fit neatly into known native traditions. In the 18th and 19th centuries, new theories emerged. Antiquarians eager to link the New World to Old World explorers pointed to supposed Norse origins, claiming the rock as evidence of Viking landings centuries before Columbus. Others suggested Portuguese explorers, citing Miguel Corte-Real, a navigator who vanished in 1502, as a possible author of the inscriptions. His family crest, some insisted, could be discerned in the markings. By the 19th century, Italian, Phoenician, and even Chinese origins had been proposed, each reflecting both scholarly speculation and cultural pride. The ambiguity was fueled by the rock's very nature. The inscriptions are shallow, weathered, and chaotic in appearance. Many resemble straight lines or crude figures, open to almost any interpretation. The human mind seeks patterns, and in Dighton Rock, observers often see what they want to find. One century's scholars found crosses and runes, another century's found ships and crowns. In this way, the boulder became less a definitive artifact and more a mirror for human imagination. In 1912, Dighton Rock was moved from the river to a museum built specifically to house it, preventing further erosion by tide and ice. There it remains today, preserved within glass walls, studied by archaeologists, linguists, and curious visitors. Modern analysis using 3D scanning and digital tracing has revealed details invisible to earlier observers, but clarity has not brought consensus. One compelling line of research ties the markings to native petroglyph traditions across the Northeast, which often use geometric forms to record events, boundaries, or visions. The shallow carvings may represent clan symbols or mythological scenes, yet the resemblance to European characters, accidental or intentional, keeps alternative theories alive. The enduring power of Dighton Rock lies not only in the carvings themselves, but in what they represent, the desire to connect past to present, to claim ownership of history through interpretation. Was it truly a record left by Norse explorers pushing farther south than Greenland? Was it a Portuguese castaway's desperate mark of survival? Or was it, more simply, an indigenous creation, misread and overwritten by centuries of speculation? The boulder offers no clear answers. Its surface is a palimpsest, a carved riddle enduring through tides, erosion, and human debate. Visitors today often remark on its silence the way it sits, massive and mute, as though daring us to decipher its meaning. And perhaps that is the heart of its mystery. That a single rock, weathered by centuries, can carry so many possible stories, yet reveal none with certainty. Even the Dyatlov Pass incident. In February 1959, 9 Russian hikers fled their tent in the Ural Mountains in sub-zero cold. Some were found barefoot, others with crushed bones and strange burns. Their final journal entries spoke of glowing orbs in the night sky. The cause remains one of the most chilling outdoor mysteries in modern history. The expedition began with optimism. A group of 10 students and graduates from the Ural Polytechnic Institute set out on January 27, 1959, led by Igor Dyatlov, a 2-3-year-old engineering student known for his skill and discipline. Their goal was to reach Otorten Mountain, a remote peak in the northern Urals. All members were experienced skiers and hikers, seasoned in harsh winter conditions. Their trek was classified as the highest difficulty, but within their capabilities. On January 28th, one member, Yuri Yudin, fell ill and turned back. His decision spared his life. The remaining 9 pressed on, skiing through forests and frozen rivers, recording their journey in journals and photographs. Entries were cheerful, filled with jokes, songs, and optimism. They were unaware that their route would soon become infamous, remembered forever as Dyatlov Pass. By February 1st, they reached the slopes of Kholat Syakh, a mountain whose name in the local Mansi language means dead mountain. Caught in worsening weather, with visibility dropping, they pitched their tent on an exposed slope rather than retreating to the shelter of the forest below. This decision remains one of the many puzzles of the case. What happened that night is still debated. When search parties arrived weeks later, they found the tent abandoned. It had been cut open from the inside. Inside, boots, coats, and supplies were left behind, as though the hikers had fled suddenly in panic. Footprints in the snow revealed that they had walked, not run, toward the forest barefoot or in socks, despite the negative 30 degrees Celsius temperatures. The first bodies were found about a mile from the tent, near the remains of a small fire beneath a cedar tree. They were dressed lightly, their skin showing burns, their hands scraped as if from climbing. 3 more were discovered between the cedar and the tent, as though they had tried to crawl back. Months later, 4 more were uncovered in a ravine under deep snow. These showed the most disturbing injuries. Crushed ribs, fractured skulls, and internal trauma likened to the force of a car crash, yet with no external wounds. One woman was missing her eyes and tongue. Adding to the strangeness were eyewitness accounts from other groups in the region. Several reported seeing glowing orange spheres in the sky around the same time. Whether natural atmospheric phenomena, secret military tests, or something else entirely, the lights became a central piece of the mystery. The official Soviet investigation concluded only that the hikers had died due to an unknown compelling force. Files were sealed, fueling speculation. Over the decades, theories have multiplied. An avalanche driving the hikers to flee their tent. Infrasound from wind patterns inducing panic. Military experiments involving parachute mines, an encounter with local Mansi hunters, even extraterrestrial involvement. Each theory explains some evidence, but none explain it all. In 2019, Russian prosecutors reopened the case. Their final conclusion in 2020 pointed to a small avalanche, suggesting that snow collapsing onto the tent forced the group to flee, only for hypothermia and injuries to claim them. Yet skeptics argue the slope was too shallow, the pattern of injuries inconsistent, and the glowing orbs left unexplained. Today, the Dyatlov Pass remains a place of uneasy silence. A memorial stone marks where the 9 hikers fell, their names etched in granite against the endless snow. Visitors who trek there still report the uncanny stillness of the site, the way the wind howls through the pass as though carrying whispers. The unanswered questions linger. Why did trained hikers abandon their tent? What caused such violent injuries without visible wounds? And what were the lights in the sky that night? The mountains have kept their secrets. And as the years pass, the Dyatlov Pass incident endures not as a closed case, but as a reminder of how quickly nature, and perhaps forces beyond it, can turn the familiar into the incomprehensible. The vanished crew of the USS Cyclops. In March 1918, the massive US Navy collier Cyclops disappeared with 306 men aboard while sailing through the Bermuda Triangle. No SOS was sent. No wreckage was ever found. The ship simply ceased to exist. The Cyclops was no ordinary vessel. Commissioned in 1910, she was the largest collier in the US Navy, stretching 542 feet in length and weighing over 19,000 tons when fully loaded. Her purpose was to carry coal, the lifeblood of the fleet in an age before oil power dominated. With 4 enormous cargo holds, she could resupply battleships and cruisers anywhere in the world. She was considered a workhorse, steady and dependable. In early 1918, the Cyclops was assigned a critical mission, transporting 10,000 tons of manganese ore from Brazil to the United States. The ore was vital for steelmaking, used in weapons and machinery as World War I raged in Europe. On February 16th, she departed Rio de Janeiro, commanded by Lieutenant Commander George W. Worley. Her crew included both seasoned sailors and new recruits, along with a number of civilians. The voyage to Barbados was uneventful. On March 3rd, 1918, the Cyclops made port there to take on supplies. Witnesses described her riding low in the water under the immense weight of her cargo. Despite concerns about stability, no signs of immediate trouble were reported. On March 4th, she set out again, bound for Baltimore. That was the last time anyone saw her. No distress call was ever received. No debris, no oil slick, no bodies ever surfaced. An entire ship, one of the largest of its kind, had vanished without a trace somewhere in the stretch of ocean now infamous as the Bermuda Triangle. The loss remains the single largest non-combat death toll in U.S. naval history. Investigations began almost immediately. Some pointed to the Cyclops' cargo. Manganese ore is incredibly dense, and if improperly loaded, it could shift suddenly in rough seas, capsizing the vessel. Others speculated structural failure. The ship had experienced engine trouble earlier in her career, and there were reports of cracks in her hull. Yet if she had broken apart, some wreckage should have floated barrels, lifeboats, wooden debris. None was ever found. More curious still were reports about her captain. Commander Worley was a German-born officer whose leadership style had been questioned. Some sailors accused him of harsh treatment, even erratic behavior. Rumors spread after the disappearance that he might have turned traitor, steering the Cyclops toward an enemy port, but no evidence supported such claims, and by 1918, German raiders in the Atlantic were under close watch. The Bermuda Triangle itself soon became part of the story. Over the years, writers and journalists linked the Cyclops' disappearance to other vanishing ships and aircraft in the same region. Theories ranged from sudden storms and rogue waves to more exotic ideas, magnetic anomalies disrupting navigation, undersea earthquakes, or even forces beyond science. The absence of wreckage, despite decades of naval patrols and modern sonar searches, only deepened the mystery. The tragedy did not end with the Cyclops. 2 of her sister ships, the Proteus and the Nereus, both disappeared in the North Atlantic during World War II, while carrying similar cargoes of ore. Neither was ever recovered. The pattern fueled speculation that design flaws made the class vulnerable, though again, no definitive evidence was found. Today, the Cyclops remains a ghost in naval history. Her name is etched on memorials, but her fate is written only in speculation. Somewhere beneath the waves, perhaps at depths beyond reach, may lie a steel hull filled with manganese, her crew still entombed. Or perhaps the ocean has erased every trace, and the silence that followed her last departure in 1918 still lingers. No message, no clue. Just the endless expanse of sea, swallowing the largest ship ever to vanish in the Bermuda Triangle. The mystery of the Antikythera mechanism. Discovered in a shipwreck off Greece in 1901, the corroded bronze gears of the Antikythera mechanism turned out to be a 2,000-year-old analog computer. Its precision predicted eclipses and planetary motion centuries before such technology was thought possible. The story begins with sponge divers near the island of Antikythera in the spring of 1900. Seeking shelter from a storm, they explored the seabed at depths of nearly 150 feet. There, scattered across the sand, lay the remnants of a vast Roman-era shipwreck. Bronze statues, marble columns, amphorae, and jewelry were brought to the surface, treasures destined for museums. Among the debris was a lump of corroded bronze and wood, so encrusted that it seemed at first unremarkable. Only later would it reveal its true nature. When conservators examined the fragment in 1902, they noticed something astonishing. Within the corrosion were visible gears, teeth finely cut into bronze, locked in a complex arrangement. The fragment contained interlocking wheels of different sizes, more reminiscent of a modern clock than anything known from antiquity. Scholars puzzled over it, for no ancient texts had ever described such a device. Over time, more than 80 fragments were recovered, representing at least 30 interlocking gears. Using X-ray imaging and CT scans in the late 20th and early 21st centuries, researchers painstakingly reconstructed the mechanism. What they discovered defied expectations. The device was capable of modeling the motions of the sun, moon, and planets. Dials predicted lunar and solar eclipses with astonishing accuracy. Inscriptions revealed cycles of 223 months, aligning with the Saros cycle used to forecast eclipses. The mechanism was housed in a wooden case about the size of a shoebox, with bronze dials on the front and back. A hand crank would have set the gears in motion, displaying the positions of celestial bodies at any chosen date. In effect, it was an ancient computer, a machine for simulating the cosmos. Its craftsmanship was centuries ahead of its time. For comparison, the next known devices of similar mechanical complexity did not appear in Europe until the development of elaborate astronomical clocks in the 14th century. How then did artisans of the 1st or 2nd century BCE possess such advanced knowledge of gearwork, mathematics, and astronomy? Some scholars attribute it to the Greek polymath Hipparchus, who lived in the same era and whose theories of lunar motion align with the mechanism's design. Others point to the school of Archimedes, famed for its mechanical ingenuity, yet no direct link has ever been proven. The shipwreck itself, dating to around 70 BCE, suggests the device may have been looted or transported from a Greek workshop to Rome, intended as a prized object for a wealthy patron. Even more intriguing are the inscriptions on the fragments. Carefully etched Greek letters describe cycles of eclipses, risings of constellations, and even references to the Olympic Games calendar. This suggests the mechanism was not just a scientific tool, but also tied to cultural and religious life, a way of aligning human events with celestial rhythms. But questions remain. Was the Antikythera mechanism unique, a singular masterpiece, or were such devices once more common, lost to time? If they were widespread, why have no others survived? Did this knowledge vanish with the fall of ancient civilizations, only to be rediscovered more than a millennium later? Today, the fragments are housed in the National Archaeological Museum in Athens. Replicas, built from the surviving evidence, function flawlessly, their gears turning smoothly to reveal eclipses, planetary alignments, and celestial cycles just as they would have 2 millennia ago. Visitors stare at them in awe, confronted with the realization that the ancients possessed a mastery of technology we had not imagined. The corroded gears of the Antikythera mechanism whisper of genius, lost to history. And perhaps the most haunting thought is this: if one device like this survived, what other machines, what other knowledge might have been lost beneath the waves or buried beneath the sands? The Phantom Tram of Versailles. In 1901, two Oxford professors visiting Versailles claimed to step into a strange time slip. They described meeting figures in 18th century dress, seeing buildings long demolished, and encountering Marie Antoinette herself sketching by a fountain. Their accounts, later published in an adventure, remain among the most famous alleged temporal anomalies in history. The women were Charlotte Anne Moberly and Eleanor Jourdain, both respected academics. Moberly was the principal of St. Hugh's College, Oxford, while Jourdain was a classics scholar and vice principal. They were not spiritualists or writers of ghost stories, but women of education and responsibility. Their visit to France in the summer of 1901 was meant simply as a holiday. On August 10th, they decided to tour the Palace of Versailles, once the seat of French monarchy and a place of immense historical weight. Their walk began normally. The day was hot, the gardens filled with tourists, but as they moved away from the main palace toward the Petit Trianon, a smaller estate once beloved by Queen Marie Antoinette, they began to feel a shift in atmosphere. The sunlight dimmed, the air grew heavy, and the sounds of other visitors seemed to fade away. Moberly later described a sensation of oppression and dreariness settling over her. It was then that they noticed strange figures. A man in a long cloak and broad-brimmed hat passed them on the path, his appearance archaic. Ahead, they saw two men in tricorn hats and green coats, carrying spades. Their clothing was unmistakably of the 18th century. Nearby stood a woman in a pale dress, seated by a garden building that, at the time, no longer existed. Moberly described her as sketching calmly, her features delicate, her bearing refined. Later, she would identify this figure as Marie Antoinette herself. Disoriented, the two women pressed on. They reached the Petit Trianon, where the oppressive feeling lifted. The building now appeared as tourists of 1901 would have seen it. Shaken, they left quickly, uncertain of what they had experienced. Back in England, they compared notes. Both had vivid, consistent memories of the walk, yet subtle differences in detail suggested independent perception rather than collusion. Troubled, they began research into Versailles' history. To their astonishment, they discovered that some of the features they had seen, a long-vanished garden pavilion, specific pathways, even details of Antoinette's clothing matched historical records not widely available at the time. In 1911, they published their experiences in a book titled An Adventure, under the pseudonyms Elizabeth Morrison and Francis Lamont. The book caused a sensation. Some readers hailed it as proof of time slips, moments when the past overlays the present, allowing glimpses into vanished centuries. Others dismissed it as hallucination, fatigue, or the product of suggestible imaginations influenced by Versailles' heavy history. Skeptics later suggested psychological explanations. Perhaps the two women had wandered into a costumed pageant or encountered reenactors. Yet no such events were recorded on that day. Others posited shared delusion or folie à deux, though the precise historical accuracy of their descriptions remains difficult to explain. Over the decades, the case has remained one of the most famous alleged temporal anomalies. Researchers continue to debate whether Moberly and Jourdain stepped into a pocket of the past, glimpsed ghostly echoes imprinted on the landscape, or simply misinterpreted what they saw. What is certain is the intensity of their conviction. Both women maintained their accounts for the rest of their lives, unwavering in their belief that they had experienced something extraordinary. Moberly died in 1937, Jourdain in 1924, each standing by their testimony. Today, visitors still walk the shaded gardens of Versailles, past fountains and groves where kings and queens once strolled. The Petit Trianon remains serene, Yet its pathways carry a strange resonance. Many claim to feel a similar sense of heaviness, a subtle shift, as though the past lingers close at hand. And so the question endures, did two scholars simply fall prey to imagination, or did they, for a brief afternoon in 1901, truly step across the boundary of time? The vanishing of Pan Am Flight 7. On the 8th of November 1957, Pan Am Flight 7, a Boeing Stratocruiser, vanished over the Pacific. Wreckage later washed ashore, but autopsies revealed strange traces of carbon monoxide poisoning. To this day, no official cause explains the doomed flight. Flight 7, formerly designated the Clipper Romance of the Skies, departed San Francisco at 11:51 a.m. Its destination was Honolulu, the first leg of a luxury round-the-world service. On board were 36 passengers and 8 crew, a mix of business travelers, vacationers, and Pan Am staff. The aircraft itself, a Boeing 377 Stratocruiser, was among the most advanced long-range passenger planes of its day, derived from the military B-29 bomber, with a double-deck cabin, sleeping berths, and a pressurized fuselage. It was designed to make transoceanic travel not just possible, but glamorous. The crew was highly experienced. Captain Gordon Brown had logged thousands of hours, including extensive trans-Pacific flights. The weather that day was fair, with no storms forecast along the route. Everything suggested an uneventful flight. For the first several hours, communications were normal. At 4:04 p.m., a routine position report placed the aircraft more than 1,000 miles from San Francisco, cruising smoothly at 21,000 feet. The next scheduled transmission, however, never came. Silence fell. Hours later, when the plane failed to arrive in Honolulu, search operations began across the vast Pacific. It took nearly a week before wreckage was found. U.S. Navy aircraft spotted floating debris about 900 miles northeast of Honolulu. Recovery ships brought back life vests, seat cushions, and pieces of fuselage. Grimly, they also retrieved the bodies of 19 of the 44 souls aboard. The rest were lost to the sea. Autopsies deepened the mystery. Several victims showed elevated levels of carbon monoxide in their blood, evidence of poisoning before death. But how could this have happened on a modern aircraft? Investigators considered engine exhaust leakage, but the Stratocruiser's pressurization system should have prevented it. Sabotage was also whispered, a deliberate release of toxic gas, but no bomb residue or incendiary damage was ever found. The crash investigation faced immense challenges. The bulk of the wreckage lay unrecovered on the ocean floor. Beyond the technology of the time, the Civil Aeronautics Board, responsible for the inquiry, sifted through what little evidence they had. Structural failure? Unlikely, as debris showed no clear signs of explosive decompression. Pilot error? Captain Brown's reputation and weather conditions made this improbable. The final report, issued in 1959, admitted defeat. The cause could not be determined. Speculation filled the void. Some pointed to mechanical failure, perhaps a propeller blade had sheared off, striking the fuselage. Others suggested fire, with carbon monoxide as a byproduct of smoke inhalation. More dramatic theories invoked sabotage, corporate espionage, or even insurance fraud, fueled by the fact that one passenger had taken out an unusually large life insurance policy before boarding. None of these theories could be proven. Adding to the unease was the flight's name. Romance of the Skies had been marketed as a symbol of adventure and modern luxury. Instead, it became a ghost flight, remembered for mystery and unanswered questions. Families of the victims pressed for answers, but even as aviation technology advanced, the puzzle of Flight 7 remained unsolved. Today, the site of the disaster lies in one of the deepest and most remote parts of the Pacific. Advances in underwater exploration have solved many historic wreck mysteries, but Flight 7 has not been revisited. Unlike the Titanic or Flight 370, no major expedition has searched its final resting place. The ocean still holds its secrets. And so the silence that fell after 4 p.m. on November 8th, 1957, remains unbroken. A luxury airliner, its passengers, and its crew vanished into the void, leaving behind only fragments on the waves, poisoned blood in the autopsy reports, and the haunting question of what happened in those final minutes above the Pacific. The lost desert army of Cambyses II. Around 524 BCE, Persian king Cambyses II dispatched 50,000 soldiers across the Egyptian desert to destroy the oracle of Amun. They never arrived. Ancient accounts say a violent sandstorm swallowed them whole. Despite countless searches, no trace of the army has ever been found beneath the shifting dunes. Cambyses II, son of Cyrus the Great, ruled the vast Achaemenid Persian Empire. In his reign, Persia stretched from modern-day Iran across Mesopotamia and into Egypt, which Cambyses had recently conquered after the Battle of Pelusium. Yet one bastion of Egyptian religion defied his rule. The famed oracle of Amun at Siwa Oasis, a remote shrine deep in the Libyan desert. The oracle's priests refused to recognize Persian authority, and Cambyses determined to crush them as a display of dominance. According to the historian Herodotus, writing in the 5th century BCE, Cambyses ordered an army of 50,000 men to march west from Thebes across the desert to Siwa. The force, comprised of infantry and support, set out with provisions, guides, and the confidence of imperial might. They marched for days across the baking plateau, the horizon shimmering with heat, their footprints trailing into the sands. Somewhere beyond the oasis of Karga, they vanished. Herodotus recounts that after 7 days' journey, the army reached a place called the Oasis of the Ammonians. There, as they camped, a sudden storm arose. Fierce winds swept across the plain, carrying walls of sand. The storm raged with such violence that it buried the army alive, erasing them in a single day. Not one soldier, not one weapon, not one banner remained visible. The desert had consumed them whole. For centuries, the tale lingered as legend. Some dismissed it as myth, a moral fable of hubris punished by nature. Yet the possibility of an entire army lost beneath shifting dunes has fueled one of archaeology's great quests. From the 19th century onward, explorers scoured the western desert of Egypt in search of evidence. Dozens of expeditions combed the sands near Siwa and the Gilf Kebir plateau. Yet no campsites, no weapons, no bones have ever been recovered. Modern theories offer competing explanations. Some suggest Herodotus exaggerated and that Cambyses' army never existed in such numbers, perhaps. A smaller detachment was sent and simply perished from thirst, disease, or hostile tribes. Others argue that a sandstorm, while devastating, would not bury so vast a force without leaving trace remains. Wind moves dunes, but human artifacts, weapons, shields, armor should have surfaced. The absence of any physical evidence remains the greatest puzzle. In recent decades, tantalizing reports have surfaced. In 2009, Italian researchers claim to have found bronze arrowheads, a sword fragment, and pieces of Persian-style ceramics deep in the desert west of Siwa. The team argued these belonged to Cambyses' lost men. Yet Egyptian authorities disputed the findings, and the precise location was never verified. The desert, vast and shifting, keeps its secrets close. Beyond the archaeology lies the symbolic weight of the story. The oracle of Amun, consulted by Alexander the Great a century later, was a place of immense spiritual power. To attack it was to challenge not just Egypt, but the gods themselves. That Cambyses' army should vanish en route feels, to many, less like coincidence and more like divine retribution. The desert, indifferent and absolute, became the executioner. Today, the sands of the western desert stretch in endless dunes, unbroken by markers of the past. Satellite imaging, ground-penetrating radar, and new technologies may one day reveal what lies beneath. But for now, the fate of 50,000 soldiers remains a silence written into the desert itself. and as the wind sweeps across the Siwa oasis, one can still imagine the distant echo of marching feet, swallowed long ago, an army erased not by battle, but by the shifting sands of time. The mystery of Easter Island's Moai. On a remote Pacific island, nearly 900 stone giants stand facing inland, some weighing over 80 tons. Polynesian settlers somehow carved, transported, and erected these statues centuries ago, but without draft animals or metal tools. Their true purpose remains cloaked in silence. The island is known to its inhabitants as Rapa Nui, a volcanic speck of land just 15 miles across, isolated by thousands of miles of open ocean. Settled by Polynesian voyagers around the 12th century, it became home to one of the most extraordinary feats of prehistoric engineering. From the volcanic tuff of the Rano Raraku quarry, the islanders carved colossal human figures, elongated faces, heavy brows, and solemn expressions staring inward toward the heart of the island. Each moai, as the statues are called, was monumental in scale. Some rose over 30 feet in height and weighed as much as 80 tons. Tools available were no more than stone chisels, yet the workmanship is precise, the features distinct. Even more astonishing is how the statues were moved. The quarry lies miles from the platforms, or ahu, where most moai were erected, with no draft animals, no wheels, and only ropes of plant fiber. How did a small island population transport such giants across rugged terrain? Theories abound. Some researchers believe the statues were dragged horizontally on wooden sledges, pulled by teams across log rollers. Yet the island's deforestation makes this difficult to reconcile. By the time Europeans arrived in 1722, Rapa Nui was nearly treeless. More recent experiments suggest another possibility, that the statues were walked upright, using ropes, rocked from side to side like massive stone puppets. In 2012, archaeologists demonstrated this method successfully with a replica moai, lending weight to oral traditions that the statues walked to their places. The purpose of the moai is equally enigmatic. Most face inland, not out to sea, as though watching over the villages. Archaeologists believe they represented deified ancestors, their presence linking the living to the spiritual world. Raised on platforms containing burials, the statues may have been guardians, keeping silent watch over their clans. Some were topped with large red stone hats, or pukau, whose meaning is debated, perhaps symbols of status or echoes of Polynesian hairstyles. But the moai also bear witness to tragedy. By the 17th century, Rapa Nui society had entered decline. Deforestation stripped the island of resources, leading to soil erosion and famine. Rival clans toppled each other's statues in violent conflict, leaving many moai face down in the earth. When European explorers first recorded the island, the once flourishing culture had been devastated by internal strife, disease, and later slave raids. Yet the statues endured, half buried in volcanic soil, their heads protruding like sentinels from another age. Excavations revealed that what appeared to be just heads were often full bodies, buried over time by sediment. Carvings on their backs hinted at lost symbolism. Spirals, birds, and glyphs connected to the island's vanished Rongorongo script, itself undeciphered. Modern science has illuminated much. Radiocarbon dating places the peak of moai construction between the 13th and 16th centuries. Genetic studies trace the Rapa Nui people's origins to Polynesia, not South America, as once theorized. And experiments have shown that with ropes, leverage, and coordinated labor, even the largest statues could indeed be moved. Yet mystery remains, not in the mechanics alone, but in the vision. What compelled a society so small to devote such energy to monuments of such scale? Today, the moai stand weathered by salt and wind, gazing across fields of grass and volcanic rock. Tourists arrive by air, walking among them in silence, dwarfed by the sheer scale. In their stillness, the statues feel alive, as though holding secrets beyond language, and the unanswered question lingers. Were the moai monuments of reverence, warnings of power, or messages meant for gods that no longer answer. The Hollow Men of the Andes. In 1972, a Uruguayan plane carrying a rugby team crashed in the Andes. Survivors endured for 72 days, forced to make unthinkable choices to live. When rescuers finally arrived, they found gaunt figures who had endured not just the cold, but the weight of a terrible decision. The flight, Uruguayan Air Force Flight 571, departed Montevideo on the 12th of October 1972, bound for Santiago, Chile. On board were 45 passengers and crew, including members of the Old Christians Club rugby team, their friends, and family. The route took them across the Andes, a range of jagged peaks where storms and turbulence are constant threats. On October 13th, with cloud cover thick and visibility poor, the pilots miscalculated their position. Believing they had cleared the mountains, they began descending. Instead, the aircraft slammed into a glacier at nearly 12,000 feet. The fuselage broke apart, scattering passengers, wings, and luggage across the snow. 12 people died instantly. Others succumbed to injuries in the days that followed. For the 27 who remained, survival meant facing a hostile world of ice and rock. Temperatures dropped to -30 degrees Celsius at night. There was no vegetation, no animals, and little to eat. Rations amounted to chocolate bars, a few bottles of wine, and scraps salvaged from luggage. Within a week, these were gone. The survivors tried melting snow for water, using metal fragments from the wreckage. Hunger gnawed relentlessly, weakening them further. Then came the avalanches. On October 29th, a slide buried the remains of the fuselage, killing 8 more people as they slept. The survivors dug frantically with bare hands, pulling themselves out of the snow. Their numbers were dwindling, and their bodies wasting away. By November, desperation forced them to confront the unthinkable. To survive, they would have to consume the flesh of their dead companions. This decision, recorded later in survivors' testimonies, was not made lightly. They prayed, they argued, they resisted. Yet the frozen bodies preserved in the snow became their only possible source of sustenance. Using shards of glass and metal, they cut small strips of flesh, drying them in the sun or swallowing them frozen. It was an act of survival that bound them together in secrecy and shame, but also gave them the strength to endure. Attempts to find help seemed futile. The mountains stretched endlessly, their white peaks shimmering in the thin air. Radio news, intercepted on salvaged equipment, confirmed the search had been called off after 10 days. Officially, the passengers of Flight 571 were presumed dead. The knowledge was crushing, yet hope persisted. In December, after more than 2 months trapped in the mountains, 3 men, Fernando Parrado, Roberto Canessa, and Antonio Vizintin, set out on foot to cross the Andes. Their journey was almost impossible. 10 days, carrying little food, sleeping in the open, and climbing ridges that rose over 15,000 feet. At last, Parrado and Canessa stumbled upon Chilean herdsmen near the valley of the Rio Azufre. Exhausted, skeletal, and sunburned, they begged for help. On December 23, 1972, helicopters reached the crash site. The remaining survivors, 16 inches total, were airlifted out after 72 days in the mountains. Photographs of their hollow-eyed faces shocked the world. The story of their endurance and the choices they had made dominated headlines. For years, the survivors faced questions, judgment, and fascination. Some condemned their actions, others saw them as proof of human resilience. Over time, their accounts have been recorded in books, documentaries, and the film Alive. Yet behind the retellings remains a simple truth. Survival demanded a price no one could have imagined before the crash. The wreckage of Flight 571 still rests in the Andes, bleached white against the snow. Climbers who pass the site describe an overwhelming silence, broken only by wind. It is a place where endurance triumphed, but also where the line between life and death blurred beyond recognition. And perhaps that is the true horror of the Andes story. Not the crash itself, but the mirror it holds to humanity, showing what desperate men will do when every other option is gone. The Lost Expedition of Ludwig Leichhardt. In 1848, German explorer Ludwig Leichhardt set out from Australia's Darling Downs with men, livestock, and supplies, aiming to cross the continent. He vanished into the outback. Decades later, Aboriginal stories spoke of white men's bones deep in the interior, but no confirmed trace was ever recovered. Leichhardt was already a figure of legend in his time. Born in 1813 inches, Prussia, he came to Australia in the 1842 and quickly gained fame for his daring expeditions. His first great journey, from the Darling Downs to Port Essington near modern-day Darwin, covered nearly 3,000 miles of uncharted terrain. Against enormous odds, he succeeded, earning the nickname the Prince of Explorers. But his ambition grew. By the mid-1842, he dreamed of crossing the entire continent from east to west, an expedition longer and more perilous than anything attempted before. On the 3rd of April 1848, Leichhardt departed from the Darling Downs in Queensland with a party of 7 men, 17 horses, 20 mules, and 50 bullocks laden with supplies. His plan was to traverse the vast interior and reach the Swan River settlement in Western Australia, a distance of nearly 2,500 miles through deserts, unknown rivers, and hostile terrain. The expedition's early progress seemed steady, with reports reaching nearby settlements of their movement. But after they passed into the vast wilderness beyond the last station, silence fell. Months stretched into years, and no word came back. Search parties were launched. In 1852, one group discovered a camp marked by trees carved with the letter L, believed to be Leichhardt's blaze. In later decades, scattered relics surfaced: iron tent pegs, horseshoes, and rifle barrels, often found deep in the Northern Territory or Western Australia. Aboriginal oral histories spoke of ghostly columns of white men with animals moving through the desert, some perishing along dry riverbeds, their bones left to bleach in the sunday. Yet none of the finds could be definitively proven as Leichhardt's last camp. The fate of the expedition became a matter of national obsession. Some believed the party had perished of thirst in the Simpson Desert, swallowed by dunes that shift endlessly with the wind. Others argued they may have been killed in clashes with Aboriginal groups defending their lands. A few optimists hoped they had reached the western coast but never returned, lost to storms or starvation before sending word. In the late 19th century, explorers continued to report tantalizing evidence. Alfred Giles, a bushman, claimed to have seen a rusted gun near the Gulf of Carpentaria. In 1900, cattlemen found a brass plate inscribed Ludwig Leichhardt, 1848, attached to a gun stock in the desert, though whether it was authentic or planted remained debated. Even into the 20th century, fragments of equipment were uncovered across remote Australia, fueling speculation that Leichhardt's men had travelled farther than anyone imagined before meeting their end. Modern archaeology and satellite imaging have not solved the riddle. The sheer scale of the Australian outback, an expanse of deserts, salt pans, and scrublands larger than Western Europe, means that remains could still lie hidden, scattered and unrecognizable after 170 years of weathering. Forensic testing of relics has confirmed some were of mid-19th century origin, but none conclusively tied to Leichhardt himself. Leichhardt's disappearance endures as a symbol of both ambition and fragility. His attempt represented the extreme edge of human endurance in a continent unforgiving to outsiders. Aboriginal communities had thrived in those landscapes for tens of thousands of years, but Leichhardt's expedition, weighed down with European methods and heavy livestock, was ill-suited to survive without constant water and local knowledge. Today, Leichhardt's name is carved into Australian geography. Rivers, towns, and electorates bear it, yet his body and the bodies of his men remain untraced. The desert, vast and silent, holds its secret. And as the wind moves across the red sands of the interior, the thought lingers. Somewhere, perhaps beneath dunes or among spinifex plains, lie the final remnants of an expedition swallowed whole by the land itself. The riddle of the Great Zimbabwe Ruins. In southeastern Africa, vast stone walls rise in intricate patterns, the remains of a medieval city built with such precision that mortar was unnecessary. Early European explorers insisted it must have been constructed by outsiders, but archaeological evidence points to a local civilization whose full history remains lost. The site is known as Great Zimbabwe, located in the modern nation of Zimbabwe, which takes its name from the ruins. The term Zimbabwe comes from the Shona phrase Dzimba Dzamabwe, houses of stone, spread over more than 720 hectares, nearly 3 square miles. The ruins once formed the heart of a thriving city that flourished between the 11th and 15th centuries CE. At its peak, it may have housed 10,000, 20,000 inhabitants, making it one of the largest urban centers in sub-Saharan Africa during the medieval period. The most striking feature of the site is its stone architecture. Massive walls, some stretching over 820 feet long and standing more than 30 feet high, were built without mortar. Granite blocks, shaped and fitted with astonishing precision, interlock in elegant patterns. The walls enclose courtyards, passageways, and towers, including the famous Great Enclosure, a vast elliptical structure whose exact purpose remains debated. Nearby stands the conical tower, rising 30 feet, its smooth curves unlike anything else in African stonework. European explorers arriving in the 19th century struggled to accept that such a city could have been built by Africans. Many clung to racial prejudices of the era, attributing the ruins to Phoenicians, Arabs, or even the Queen of Sheba's kingdom. The explorer Karl Mauch, visiting in 1871, declared the structures must have been inspired by Solomon's Temple. These claims ignored local traditions and oral histories that consistently linked the site to ancestors of the Shona people. By the early 20th century, archaeology began to push back against these colonial myths. Excavations revealed pottery, tools, and artifacts consistent with local craftsmanship, Chinese porcelain, Persian glassware, and Arab coins unearthed at the site confirmed that Great Zimbabwe was part of a vast trade network that reached as far as India and China. Gold, ivory, and cattle wealth likely supported this trade, making the city a hub of commerce, culture, and power in southern Africa. Yet much remains enigmatic. No written records survive from Great Zimbabwe. Its rulers left no chronicles, its artisans no texts. All interpretation comes from oral history and the physical remains of stone and artifact. Why was the city eventually abandoned around the 15th century? Some suggest overgrazing and deforestation depleted the land, undermining its ability to sustain a large population. Others point to shifting trade routes that left the city isolated. Disease may also have played a role. The truth may be a combination, but the silence of the ruins offers no clear answer. The symbolism of the structures also defies certainty. Was the conical tower a granary, a symbol of prosperity, or a ritual monument? Were the enclosures royal residences, sacred spaces, or both? The precision of the stonework, the sheer scale of the city, and the effort required to build it suggest not just practical use, but deep cultural meaning, much of which remains unrecovered. Modern Zimbabweans view the ruins with pride, a symbol of indigenous achievement long denied by colonial narratives. In 1986, Great Zimbabwe was declared a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Today, visitors walk through the crumbling passageways, the sun casting shadows on walls that have stood for centuries, their silence as powerful as their presence. And yet the mystery lingers. How did a medieval African civilization achieve such architectural sophistication without written records? What stories, rituals, and dynasties once filled these courtyards? The walls remain, mute but enduring, reminders of a civilization that rose, thrived, and vanished, leaving behind stone riddles that the passing centuries have yet to fully solve. The Hessdalen Valley Lights. Since the 1940 seconds, a Norwegian valley has reported glowing spheres of light that hover, dart, and vanish without sound. Scientific teams have recorded them on radar and film, yet no definitive explanation, atmospheric plasma, piezoelectric effects, or something stranger has been proven. The Hessdalen Valley lies in central Norway, a remote stretch of forested hills and farmland flanked by mountains. With only a few hundred residents, it is a quiet place, where long winters bring crisp air and skies filled with stars. Yet since at least the mid-20th century, locals have spoken of luminous orbs appearing in the night. Descriptions vary. Some are white, others yellow or red, glowing steadily or pulsing like lanterns. They range from the size of a football to several meters across, moving slowly across the valley floor or shooting upward at impossible speed. The lights often last only seconds, but at times they persist for minutes, drifting silently before fading or suddenly vanishing. Unlike meteors or aircraft, they make no sound, leave no trails, and seem unconstrained by wind. Farmers reported them hovering above fields. Hunters glimpsed them deep in the forest, and drivers on lonely roads saw them pacing alongside their cars. By the late 1970 seconds and early 1980 seconds, sightings became so frequent that the valley was averaging up to 20 reports a week. In 1983, the phenomenon drew international attention. A research initiative known as Project Hessdalen was established, bringing scientists, engineers, and students into the valley. Equipped with radar, magnetometers, cameras, and spectrographs, they set up observation posts to capture the lights. To their surprise, they did. On multiple occasions, radar tracked solid targets where luminous spheres were visible to the eye. Photographs revealed glowing objects suspended above the valley, sometimes splitting into multiple lights before merging again. One spectrographic analysis showed the lights emitting a continuous spectrum, as though from heated gas, while another revealed traces of specific elements, including iron and silicon. Explanations were proposed, but none proved conclusive. One theory suggested atmospheric plasma, created by ionization of air through unusual weather conditions. Another posited a piezoelectric effect, where pressure on quartz-bearing rocks beneath the valley might generate luminous discharges. While both are plausible, they fail to account for the duration, movement, and intelligence-like behavior reported by witnesses. Other theories lean toward the unconventional. Some argue the lights may represent a poorly understood natural phenomenon, akin to ball lightning, but on a larger scale. A few have speculated about unknown aerial technologies, or even something beyond current science. Yet, the lack of definitive physical evidence keeps such ideas firmly in the realm of speculation. The Hessdalen lights continue to this day, though less frequently than during their peak in the 1980 seconds. Modern monitoring systems, including an automated observatory installed in 1998, have captured numerous events on video and instruments. In some cases, two independent radar stations locked onto the same target simultaneously, confirming that the lights are not simply optical illusions. For locals, the lights have become both mystery and identity. Tourists visit the valley hoping to glimpse them, standing in the cold night with cameras ready. Scientists return year after year, drawn by a phenomenon that remains stubbornly unresolved. Unlike many unexplained lights, the Hessdalen case is one of the few with sustained, documented, and peer-reviewed investigation, and yet the central riddle persists. What are the Hessdalen lights? Atmospheric physics at its strangest? Geology interacting with the sky? Or a phenomenon not yet categorized by science at all? On clear nights, when the valley is still, witnesses sometimes see a sphere rise silently from the forest, glow brilliantly, then dart away into the stars. No sound, no trace, just a lingering sense that the boundary between the known and the unknown is thinner here than elsewhere. And in the silence of Hestilin, the unanswered question remains: are we witnessing a trick of Earth itself? Or a glimpse of something watching from beyond? The Tunguska blast of 1908. On a June morning, a massive explosion flattened 800 square miles of Siberian forest. Witnesses reported a fireball and shockwaves felt hundreds of miles away. Yet, no impact crater was ever found. Some say it was a meteor airburst. Others suspect something beyond current science. The date was the 30th of June 1908. In the remote taiga near the stony Tunguska River in central Siberia, a flash lit the sky brighter than the Sunday. Herdsmen and hunters miles away described a searing blue-white fireball racing across the heavens. Moments later came the blast, a thunderous detonation, followed by a shock wave that shattered windows as far as 500 miles from the epicenter. The ground shook, trees snapped like matchsticks, and some were hurled to the ground by the force of the wind. The devastation was staggering. Later surveys revealed that an estimated 80 million trees were flattened, radiating outward in a butterfly-shaped pattern across more than 2,000 square kilometers. At the center of the blast zone, trunks remained standing, stripped bare of branches, as though scorched from above. Yet, despite the destruction, no crater was ever located. Unlike other known impact sites, the land bore no massive scar. For decades, the Tunguska explosion remained shrouded in mystery. Russia's political turmoil delayed investigation. It wasn't until 1927 that a scientific expedition, led by Leonid Kulik, reached the site, expecting to find a meteorite crater. They instead found only scorched earth and endless fallen forest. Kulik's team interviewed local Evenki people, who spoke of a great ball of fire, of reindeer burned alive, and of the sky splitting in two with deafening roars. They also described a strange, lingering glow in the night sky for weeks afterward, so bright that people in Europe could read newspapers outdoors at midnight. The leading explanation is that a small asteroid or comet, roughly 50-60 meters in diameter, entered Earth's atmosphere at tens of thousands of miles per hour. Instead of striking the ground, it exploded in an airburst at an altitude of about 5-10 kilometers, releasing the energy of 10-15 megatons of TNT, nearly 1,000 times more powerful than the atomic bomb later dropped on Hiroshima. The blast wave devastated the forest, while the disintegration of the object left no crater, yet uncertainties linger. Despite decades of searching, no significant fragments of extraterrestrial material have been confirmed from the site. Traces of rare isotopes and microscopic spheres have been found, consistent with meteoritic origin, but insufficient to close the case. Some argue that a fragile comet nucleus, composed mostly of ice, could have vaporized completely. Others suggest the object's shallow entry angle prevented crater formation. Alternative theories, however, have flourished. Some early Soviet writers speculated about natural gas explosions erupting from beneath the Siberian swamps. Others whispered about secret weapons or even extraterrestrial craft. The unusual reports of glowing skies and geomagnetic disturbances added to the aura of strangeness. Even in modern times, speculation about something beyond current science persists, though most researchers remain grounded in astronomical explanations. In recent decades, satellite imaging and computer modeling have strengthened the meteor airburst theory. Simulations of asteroid entries produce damage patterns strikingly similar to Tunguska. Comparable though smaller events, like the Chelyabinsk meteor of 2013, have provided real-world confirmation, a shockwave powerful enough to shatter glass across a city, but no crater where the object disintegrated in the sky. Tunguska, on a vastly greater scale, fits the same pattern. Still, the mystery holds power because it combines awe with absence. No eyewitness stood close enough to see the object itself strike the atmosphere. No crater marks its fall. Only a scarred forest, silent swamps, and fragments of memory remain. Today, the Tunguska site is remote and desolate. Trees have regrown, softening the devastation, but aerial views still show the radial pattern of destruction. Scientists, tourists, and adventurers trek into the taiga, standing in the epicenter of one of Earth's greatest unsolved explosions, and the unanswered question endures: was it simply a cosmic visitor meeting its end in Earth's sky? Or does Tunguska hint at forces we still do not fully understand? The Utsuro-bune of Japan. In 1803, fishermen near Hitachi found a strange, hollow ship drifting ashore. Inside was a young woman with red hair, pale skin, and incomprehensible writing on the walls of her craft. She soon vanished back to sea and was never seen again. The tale appears in multiple Edo period texts, including Toen Shosetsu and Hyoryu Kishu. Each gives a similar account. On a winter morning along the eastern coast of Japan, fishermen spotted an odd vessel bobbing on the waves. Unlike any local fishing craft, it measured about 3.3 meters high and 5.5 meters wide, shaped like a bowl or a half of a sphere. The bottom was reinforced with metal plates, while the upper section was fitted with glass or crystal windows. Its strange design earned it the name Utsuro-bune, hollow ship. When the fishermen opened the craft, they found a young woman inside. She was described as strikingly unusual, about 18-20 years old, with very pale skin, long red or reddish hair, and delicate features unlike the local population. Her clothing was made of unfamiliar fabric, richly embroidered, and she clutched a small box that she refused to let anyone touch. Around the walls of the craft, strange inscriptions were etched or painted, symbols no one could recognize. Resembling neither Chinese nor Japanese writing, the fisherman attempted to communicate, but her speech was unintelligible. Some accounts describe her as smiling gently, others as distressed and tearful. She seemed to plead to be left alone, always guarding the mysterious box. After some discussion, the villagers decided to tow the vessel back out to sea, fearing it might be an omen or a disruption to their way of life. The craft drifted off, and neither the woman nor her vessel was ever seen again. For generations, the Utsuro-bune story was treated as folklore, a strange maritime legend echoing Japan's rich tradition of ghostly ships and supernatural beings. But the level of detail in the accounts, including dimensions of the craft and specific drawings preserved in Edo manuscripts, has led some researchers to wonder whether the tale might reflect an actual event. Several theories have been proposed. One suggests that the woman may have been a foreign castaway, perhaps Russian, as trade routes across the northern Pacific were opening in the early 19th century. Her red hair and unusual clothing could have marked her as European, while the writing may have been Cyrillic or another unfamiliar script. The Utsuro-bune, in this view, might have been a lifeboat or escape craft from a larger vessel. Others argue the story is allegorical, a parable reflecting anxieties of the Edo period. At the time, Japan maintained strict isolationist policies under the Tokugawa shogunate. Foreigners arriving uninvited were viewed with suspicion. The woman's mysterious box, which she would not relinquish, may symbolize forbidden knowledge or dangerous foreign influence. The decision to send her back to sea could reflect Japan's broader rejection of outside contact. More speculative ideas link the Utsuro-bune to the realm of the unexplained. Some modern writers note the craft's unusual design, round, reinforced, with windows, and compare it to descriptions of unidentified flying objects, suggesting the story might represent an early cultural interpretation of something otherworldly. The woman's pale appearance and indecipherable language fuel these interpretations, though they remain outside mainstream scholarship. Regardless of explanation, the Utsuro-bune legend has endured. The manuscripts preserve careful drawings of both the vessel and the woman, lending the story a peculiar weight. Unlike vague folklore, it comes with measurements, sketches, and repeated accounts from different sources, suggesting that something unusual was indeed witnessed. Today, the coast of Hitachi is quiet, its fishing villages facing the Pacific as they have for centuries. Yet the image persists, a hollow ship drifting silently to shore, carrying a stranger whose origins remain untraceable. And as the waves continue their endless rhythm, one wonders, did the Utsuro-bune carry a lost traveler from distant lands? Or was it something far stranger, a fleeting visitor whose secrets returned to the sea? The mystery of Roanoke Colony. In 1590, English ships returned to Roanoke Island to find the colony deserted. No bodies, no struggle, only the word Croatoan carved into a tree. The fate of over 100 settlers remains one of America's oldest unsolved mysteries. The story begins in 1587, when Sir Walter Raleigh sponsored an English settlement on Roanoke Island, off the coast of present-day North Carolina. The colony was meant to establish England's foothold in the New World, a base for trade and exploration. Led by Governor John White, it consisted of about 115 men, women, and children, including White's own daughter Eleanor and his granddaughter Virginia Dare, the first English child born in the Americas. Supplies were scarce from the start. White soon returned to England to seek reinforcements and provisions, leaving behind his family and the settlers. But England was on the brink of war with Spain. The Spanish Armada sailed in 1588, consuming England's attention and resources. White's return was delayed again and again, until finally, in 1593 years later, he was able to sail back to Roanoke. What he found was silence. The fort was abandoned, houses dismantled, and gardens overgrown. There were no signs of violence, no bodies, no graves. The only clue lay carved into a palisade post, the word Croatoan. Another carving, simply Crow, was found on a nearby tree. White had agreed with the colonists before departing that if they relocated, they would carve a sign into a tree, and if danger had forced them to flee, they would add a cross. The absence of a cross suggested no immediate threat, yet the colony was gone. Croatoan was the name of a nearby island, today known as Hatteras, and also of the Croatan people who inhabited the region. White tried to sail there immediately, believing the colonists might have moved in search of safety or allies, but storms forced his ships back out to sea. He never reached Croatoan, and he never saw his family again. Speculation about the fate of the colonists has endured for centuries. Some historians argue they integrated with local tribes, supported by oral traditions among native groups who later reported ancestors of mixed heritage. Others suggest disease, starvation, or conflict may have wiped them out. Excavations at Hatteras have uncovered European artifacts, including tools and gun parts, hinting at possible contact or relocation, though none provide conclusive proof. Another theory points inland, toward the Chesapeake Bay, where the colonists may have sought fertile ground. Early explorers later reported sightings of European-style houses and individuals with lighter eyes or hair among native communities. Still, the evidence remains fragmentary, never enough to close the case. In the centuries since, Roanoke has become part of American folklore, often framed as a ghost story. The carving, Croatoan, took on a life of its own, reappearing in strange contexts. When the writer Edgar Allan Poe died in 1849, delirious and muttering incoherently, the word Croatoan was allegedly found scrawled in his notebook. Similar reports claim the word appeared in ship logs and other mysterious deaths. Though many of these stories are likely apocryphal, modern archaeology continues to search for answers. Excavations at Site X, near the Albemarle Sound, have revealed shards of European ceramics dating to the late 16th century, leading some to argue that at least part of the colony moved inland. Yet whether all 115 settlers survived long enough to integrate, or whether they perished piecemeal through hardship, remains unknown. Roanoke endures not only because it was the first English settlement in North America, but because it vanished so completely. No final records, no eyewitness accounts. Only a single carved word left behind as a message that never reached its intended audience. Today, visitors walk the quiet island where the colony once stood, among reconstructed earthworks and whispering pines. The air carries the weight of a question unanswered for more than 4 centuries. Did the colonists survive? Or were they erased by the wilderness they sought to tame? The mystery of the Voynich manuscript, written in an unknown script, filled with bizarre botanical drawings, the Voynich manuscript has defied linguists, cryptographers, and even AI analysis. radiocarbon dating places it in the early 15th century. Yet no one has read a single word of its meaning. The manuscript is named after Wilfrid Voynich, a Polish book dealer who purchased it in 1912 from a Jesuit library in Italy. Bound in vellum and stretching across more than 240 pages, the book immediately struck him as extraordinary. Its pages were filled with looping, flowing text written in a script found nowhere else on Earth. Alongside the writing appeared elaborate illustrations, plants that do not exist, circular diagrams of stars and moons, strange bath-like tubs filled with human figures, and intricate fold-out charts. At first glance, the manuscript resembles a medieval herbal or scientific treatise. Many pages show plant drawings with accompanying text, as though describing their properties. But the plants themselves are fantastical. Some resemble familiar herbs like violets or lilies, while others are utterly alien, with impossible stems and hybrid leaves. Astronomical sections depict suns, moons, and constellations, yet arranged in ways no known star charts follow. The so-called balneological section shows dozens of nude women immersed in interconnected pools and pipes, suggesting an alchemical or medical theme. Yet the purpose remains elusive. Radiocarbon dating of the vellum has placed the manuscript's creation between 1404 and 1438 in the early Renaissance. The pigments used in the inks and paints are consistent with materials available in Europe at the time, suggesting it is not a modern forgery. The author or authors remain unknown. The manuscript has changed hands over centuries, with records linking it to the court of Emperor Rudolph II of the Holy Roman Empire, who reportedly purchased it for a large sum, believing it to be the work of the 13th century friar Roger Bacon. But this attribution has never been proven. Cryptographers and linguists have studied the text for more than a century. The script, now called Voynichese, consists of about 25 distinct characters, written with the rhythm of a real language. Words follow statistical patterns similar to natural speech, with certain characters clustering like vowels and consonants. Yet no known language or cipher matches it. Attempts to decode it as Latin, Hebrew, or even an invented code have all failed. During World War II, codebreakers who cracked Japanese military ciphers tried their hand at the manuscript and admitted defeat. In the modern era, computer algorithms and artificial intelligence have been applied. Some analyses suggest the text could represent a constructed language, heavily abbreviated, or perhaps a sophisticated hoax. Others propose it may encode information phonetically, or even in an unknown tongue now lost to time. Yet despite these efforts, no translation has yielded a coherent result. Theories about its purpose abound. Some scholars believe it may have been a medical or alchemical handbook, with the illustrations of women in pools suggesting treatments for fertility or health. Others see it as a compendium of esoteric knowledge, its secrecy deliberate, accessible only to initiates. More speculative ideas suggest it might be an elaborate hoax from the 15th century, designed to impress a wealthy patron with a book of mystery. Yet the consistency of the script across hundreds of pages argues against randomness. Even hoaxes are rarely so meticulous. The Voynich manuscript now resides in the Beinecke Rare Book and Manuscript Library at Yale University, where its pages have been digitized for worldwide study. Scholars, cryptographers, and amateurs alike pore over the images, convinced that a solution lies just out of reach. And still, the book refuses to yield its secrets. A language no one can read, plants no one can identify, diagrams that resemble maps of thought as much as maps of stars. It sits silent, a relic of an unknown mind, a message written 6 centuries ago, whose meaning remains locked away, whispering that not all human knowledge is meant to be understood. The vanishing of the Flannan Isles. Lighthouse keepers. In December 1900, a relief vessel reached the Flannan Isles off Scotland. The lighthouse was lit, but the 3 keepers had vanished. Clocks had stopped, Meals remained untouched, and the log ended abruptly. The men were never found. The Flannan Isles are a cluster of barren rocks rising from the Atlantic Ocean, about 20 miles west of Scotland's Outer Hebrides. Isolated and windswept, they had long been feared by sailors, who called them the Seven Hunters. In 1899, a lighthouse was completed on the largest isle, Eilean Mor, to guide shipping through the treacherous waters. Its keepers lived in near-total isolation, exposed to the fury of storms that crashed endlessly against the cliffs. On the 26th of December 1900, the relief ship Hesperus arrived to deliver supplies and rotate the crew. From a distance, the captain noticed something unusual. No flag flew from the pole. No one came to the landing, and the usual preparations for relief had not been made. The lighthouse lamp shone at night, but the island itself seemed deserted. When the crew landed, they found the quarters eerily abandoned. The beds were neatly made, but the kitchen told another story. Plates were on the table, meals half prepared. As though interrupted, 2 sets of oilskins, the heavy waterproof gear worn against the weather, were missing, but a third remained, suggesting that at least one man had left without proper clothing. The clocks had stopped, and the logbook ended days earlier. The last entries in the log were unsettling. On December 12th, one keeper wrote of a powerful storm, the worst I have ever seen, describing waves higher than the cliffs themselves. Another entry noted that one of the men had been very quiet, perhaps overcome with fear, while the others prayed. On December 15th, the log ended abruptly with a single line. Storm ended, sea calm, God is over all. The official investigation, carried out by the Northern Lighthouse Board, concluded that the men had likely gone outside to secure equipment during violent weather. Evidence supported this. Ropes and crates near a west landing platform were disturbed, and iron railings had been bent by immense force. The theory suggested that 2 men were swept into the sea while securing gear, and the third rushed out to help without donning his oilskins and was lost as well. Yet doubts lingered. No storm had been recorded in the region on the date the log described. Ships passing nearby reported rough seas, but not waves of such catastrophic scale. Why then would seasoned keepers abandon safety and risk the cliffs? And why had the log taken on a strangely emotional tone, noting the men's fears unusual for routine records? Alternative explanations soon spread. Some imagined a violent quarrel, with one man killing the others before throwing himself into the sea. Others spoke of supernatural forces, sea serpents, ghost ships, or malevolent spirits, long tied to the Flannans. In later decades, popular retellings embellished the mystery. Stopped clocks, overturned chairs, even birds circling ominously overhead. While not all details withstand scrutiny, the sense of something uncanny has endured. The case has inspired poems, songs, and films. Poet Wilfred Wilson Gibson's 1912 work Flannan Isle captured the haunting atmosphere. We seem to stand for an endless while, though still no word was said. Later writers drew parallels with legends of sailors vanished at sea, leaving ships adrift and abandoned. Today, the lighthouse on Eilean Mor is automated, its beams shining without human presence. Visitors who land on the island describe its silence, broken only by the wind and the crash of waves against black cliffs. The keepers' cottages stand empty, preserved as a stark reminder of the men who vanished. And as the Atlantic surges endlessly against the rocks, the question remains, were they simply victims of the sea's fury, or did something stranger unfold on that lonely isle in December 1900? The Beigong Pipes of China. Near Mount Beigong, rusted metal pipes run through rock layers dated thousands of years old. Some lead directly into a nearby lake. Their purpose and origin remain unexplained, with theories ranging from natural geology to evidence of lost technology. The story begins in the Qinghai province of western China, a remote landscape of high-altitude desert and jagged peaks. Near the foot of Mount Baigong lies a triangular cave opening, weathered into the rock. Within and around this cave, explorers in the early 2000s reported something startling. Networks of reddish-brown pipes embedded in the stone. Some were as thick as a man's arm, others no wider than a drinking straw. Many penetrated deep into the rock, while others jutted outward, running down to the shores of nearby Lake Tosan. Initial surveys described the pipes as remarkably uniform, running straight and branching at precise angles, more like the infrastructure of a ruined facility than random mineral formations. Samples taken showed a composition of 30% iron, along with traces of silicon dioxide and calcium. Curiously, several sections of pipe were heavily corroded, as though they had been exposed to the elements for immense spans of time. Dating the site only deepened the mystery. Geological analysis suggested the surrounding rock formations were as much as 150,000 years old. If the pipes were truly embedded when the rock solidified, they would predate not just Chinese civilization, but humanity itself. Local officials, intrigued by the discovery, dubbed the site the Baigong Pipes, and stories spread rapidly across international media. Explanations divided into two camps. Some proposed natural origins. Chinese geologists suggested the pipes might be fossilized tree roots, their organic matter gradually replaced with iron minerals through a process known as pseudomorphism. Over millennia, this could create tubular shapes, resembling manufactured pipes. Others argued they might be the result of iron-rich groundwater, which can deposit minerals along cracks and fissures, forming pipe-like structures. Yet skeptics of the natural theory point to their apparent uniformity and distribution. The pipes seem to converge toward the cave, as though part of an organized network. Some lead directly into Lake Tosan, evoking the image of drainage or water management systems. Tests revealed that a fraction of the material contained elements not easily explained by root fossilization, though contamination from surrounding soil could not be ruled out. The more speculative theories, unsurprisingly, have attracted wide attention. Some writers suggested the Baigong pipes could be the remnants of a long-lost civilization, their technology now rusting into oblivion. Others pushed further still, linking them to extraterrestrial visitors, claiming the cave was once the base of an ancient launch facility. These ideas remain firmly in the realm of fringe speculation, yet they highlight the degree of puzzlement the site inspires. Chinese authorities have since restricted access to the main cave, installing fencing and posting signs for preservation. Researchers continue to analyze samples, but conclusive evidence has yet to emerge. No tools, no habitation layers, no artifacts of human presence have been found in association with the pipes, only the strange metal cylinders themselves. For the local people of Delinga, the Baigong site has become a point of curiosity and pride. Tourists travel to the region to see the fenced cave mouth and the silent lake reflecting distant mountains. Standing before the rust-red pipes protruding from ancient rock, it is easy to understand why the mystery endures. Are they simply a geological oddity, iron crystallized into the shape of industry by the patience of time? Or are they, as some suggest, the corroded remnants of knowledge lost or perhaps never human at all? As the winds whistle through the high plateau, the pipes remain locked in stone, mute and inexplicable, carrying a question that has outlasted empires. What, truly, lies beneath the mountains of Baigong? The vanished expedition of S.A. André. In 1897, Salomon André attempted to reach the North Pole by hydrogen balloon. The craft lifted from Svalbard, then disappeared. 33 years later, remains were found on a frozen island, journals still legible. But many details of their final days remain unknown. Salomon August André was a Swedish engineer and national hero, admired for his daring vision at the close of the 19th century. At a time when the North Pole remained unconquered, André proposed a novel approach. He would sail through the skies. Balloons, filled with hydrogen, had already been used for exploration and science. But no one had attempted such a journey into the most inhospitable region on Earth. To the Swedish public, it was an audacious dream that captured imagination and pride. His balloon, the Örnen, the eagle, was constructed with great care. More than 20 meters high, made of varnished silk, and filled with 4,800 cubic meters of hydrogen. André designed a system of trailing ropes to steer the craft by creating drag. Though in practice, this method offered little real control. Accompanied by two companions, Knut Frankel and Nils Strindberg, he launched from the island of Svalbard on the 11th of July 1897, cheered by onlookers waving flags and firing guns in salute. The balloon ascended gracefully into the fog, drifting northward over the Arctic Ocean. Then it vanished. For more than 3 decades, no word came. The fate of the expedition became one of the great mysteries of polar exploration. Rumors circulated that the men had been sighted in Siberia, or that their balloon had crashed on the ice. Search expeditions found nothing. The Arctic, vast and merciless, swallowed all traces. It was not until 1930 that the truth began to surface. A Norwegian sealing vessel, the Brattvåg, landed on White Island, Kvitøya, east of Svalbard. There, half buried in snow and ice, the crew discovered a camp. Scattered equipment, a collapsed tent, and human remains lay preserved in the permafrost. Most astonishing were notebooks, diaries, and photographic plates still intact after 33 years. From these records, a fragmentary picture emerged. The Örnen had remained aloft for only about 2 days before crashing onto the pack ice, weighted down by leaking hydrogen and heavy condensation. The men survived the landing and attempted to trek south, dragging sledges laden with supplies. For weeks they battled shifting ice floes, bitter winds, and freezing temperatures. They hunted polar bears and seals, melting ice for water, and recorded their progress carefully in their journals. By September, exhausted and malnourished, they reached White Island. Here, their entries grew sparse and cryptic. Strindberg died first. His body later found carefully buried. André and Frankel carried on a little longer, but eventually succumbed, likely to a combination of cold, exhaustion, and illness. The final diary entry, dated the 17th of October 1897, reads simply, "It feels as if a strange fatality has followed us." Why they perished when they had rifles, food stores, and shelter materials remains debated. Some suggest trichinosis from undercooked polar bear meat. Others point to carbon monoxide poisoning from their stoves inside sealed tents. The records stop too abruptly to provide certainty. The recovered photographs add a haunting dimension. Glass plates, carefully developed decades later, show the men on the ice, posing with their balloon wreck, dragging sledges across the frozen expanse, smiling grimly at the camera. They are frozen moments of optimism, knowing what lay ahead would be brutal, but not yet knowing how final their journey would become. Today, the remains of the André expedition rest in Sweden, where their story has become legend. Historians debate whether André's plan was doomed from the start, a triumph of ambition over practicality. Yet the fragments they left behind, journals in neat handwriting, photos of lonely men against endless ice, preserve a mystery that still stirs unease. The balloon rose with cheers and vanished into mist. 33 years later, the Arctic gave back only bones, notes, and questions. The Great Pyramid's hidden void. In 2017, scientists using cosmic ray muon imaging detected a vast hidden chamber inside the Great Pyramid of Giza. Over 100 feet long, it lies above the Grand Gallery. Its purpose remains a mystery untouched since antiquity. The Great Pyramid, built for Pharaoh Khufu around 2560 BCE, has stood for more than 4,500 years, towering nearly 480 feet when completed. For centuries, explorers, scholars, and treasure seekers have probed its limestone passages. Known spaces include the King's Chamber, the Queen's Chamber, and the steep Grand Gallery that runs upward through its core. But even after millennia of study, the pyramid still guards secrets. In 2015, the International Scan Pyramids project set out to search for hidden voids using a technique called muon radiography. Cosmic rays from space constantly bombard Earth's atmosphere, creating particles known as muons that can penetrate solid stone. By placing sensitive detectors inside the pyramid, researchers could map how many muons passed through different regions. Anomalies in density would reveal hollow spaces invisible to the naked eye. After months of data collection, the results astonished the team. High above the Grand Gallery, in the very heart of the pyramid, lay a massive empty volume, at least 100 feet long, comparable in size to the Grand Gallery itself. Unlike known corridors, it showed no signs of being a passage, but a vast void sealed in solid limestone. For the first time in over 4 millennia, a new chamber had been discovered. Its purpose, however, is uncertain. The ancient builders left no records of its design, and the pyramid's interior has always been shrouded in symbolic and practical mysteries. Some Egyptologists suggest the void may simply be a relieving space, a structural cavity designed to reduce weight on the Grand Gallery below. Similar stress-relieving chambers exist above the King's Chamber, stacked with granite blocks to prevent collapse. If so, the void could represent a grander version of the same engineering solution. Others, however, see deeper significance. The sheer scale of the space suggests it was more than a structural accident. Its careful placement above the Grand Gallery, one of the pyramid's most important corridors, may indicate symbolic or ritual meaning. Was it intended as a symbolic passage for the soul of the pharaoh, echoing the celestial ascent described in the pyramid texts? Could it be an undiscovered funerary chamber, never looted, still sealed since the time of Khufu? For now, direct exploration has been impossible. The void is inaccessible by known corridors, and cutting into the pyramid is prohibited to preserve the monument. Researchers have proposed using endoscopic robots or additional non-invasive scans to map the chamber more precisely, but as of yet, no entry has been achieved. The space remains sealed, as it has for nearly 5,000 years. The discovery has reignited public fascination with the Great Pyramid, long a focus of speculation. Alternative theorists suggest the void might conceal ancient technologies, hidden caches of treasure, or even lost records of a forgotten civilization. Mainstream archaeology cautions against such leaps, but even they acknowledge that the true purpose of the void remains unresolved. What makes the mystery compelling is the balance of certainty and silence. The void is real, confirmed by 3 independent teams using different muon detectors. Its size and location are measured with precision. And yet, not a single artifact, inscription, or detail explains its role. It is a chamber, both known and unknown, mapped by modern science, but untouched since the day it was sealed. Standing at the base of the Great Pyramid, tourists see only ancient stone rising toward the sky. Deep inside, above corridors carved by human hands thousands of years ago, lies a space untouched. A room of silence suspended within the world's most famous tomb, and the question endures: did the builders intend it as mere architecture, or does it hold a secret still waiting to be revealed? The shipwreck of the SS Orang Medan. In the late 1942, distress calls came from a Dutch freighter drifting near Indonesia. All officers dead. I die. When boarding parties arrived, the crew was found frozen in terror, eyes open, mouths agape. Moments later, the ship exploded and sank, leaving no survivors. The story first surfaced in 1947 or 1948, though reports vary on the exact year. Vessels in the Straits of Malacca, one of the busiest shipping lanes in Southeast Asia, intercepted distress messages in Morse code. The sender, identity unclear, transmitted a chilling sequence. All officers, including the captain, dead in chart room and on the bridge. Probably whole crew dead. A final message followed, stark and cryptic: I die. The source of the signal was identified as the Orang Medan, a Dutch freighter whose name translates loosely as Man from Medan. A nearby American merchant ship, sometimes reported as the Silver Star, diverted to investigate. When it reached the drifting vessel, The scene was beyond comprehension. Boarding parties climbed aboard to find the crew dead where they stood or lay. Some were sprawled on decks, others in passageways, still more in the engine room. Accounts described their faces locked in expressions of terror, eyes wide open, mouths frozen mid-scream. Their arms were outstretched, as if fending off an unseen force. Even the ship's dog was found dead, teeth bared, yet no wounds or signs of struggle marked the bodies. Conditions added to the mystery. Below decks, the air was said to feel unnaturally cold, despite the tropical heat outside. The corpses showed no decomposition, though death had clearly struck hours before. In the radio room, the operator's hand still rested on the key, as though he had sent his final words in the instant of death. Before investigators could study the scene further, disaster struck. Smoke began to rise from the hold, and fire spread rapidly. The boarding party evacuated just in time. Moments later, the Orang Medan exploded with such force that it lifted from the sea before sinking beneath the waves. No wreckage was ever recovered, no trace of its cargo or crew ever found. Explanations have varied wildly. Some suggest the ship carried hazardous materials, possibly chemical weapons left over from World War II, or cargo such as potassium cyanide and nitroglycerin. A leak could have released toxic gases, killing the crew in agony, while later ignition caused the explosion. Yet no records of the ship exist in official Dutch or Lloyd's shipping registries, raising the possibility that the Orang Medan never existed as a formal vessel. Others lean toward folklore. The eeriness of the bodies, their frozen expressions, and the sudden destruction of the ship lend themselves to stories of the paranormal. Some accounts speak of supernatural forces at sea, or even extraterrestrial involvement. Still others speculate about clandestine experiments, secret smuggling operations, or Cold War cover-ups. Skeptics argue the tale may be apocryphal, a cautionary sea yarn born from fragments of real events. The first known written accounts appeared in the late 1940s and early 1950s, published in newspapers and later in Fate magazine. Details shifted between versions. Sometimes the rescuing ship was American, sometimes British, sometimes the explosion occurred immediately, sometimes hours later. The inconsistencies suggest embellishment over time, yet the mystery endures because of the fragments that align: the radio distress calls, the description of terrified corpses, and the ship's sudden obliteration. Even if exaggerated, such reports likely drew on something extraordinary that unfolded in the Straits of Malacca. Today, maritime historians continue to debate whether the Orang Medan was real, a ghost ship whose tragedy was erased by the sea, or whether it was always a legend born of fear, secrecy, and the dangers of the post-war Pacific. And as waves roll endlessly through the Malacca Strait, the chilling final words still echo, "I die." The disappearance of Everett Ruiz. In 1934, 20-year-old explorer Everett Ruiz set out into the Utah desert. His last letters spoke of going out into the wild unknown. His camp was later found abandoned, his burrows wandering. His body was never recovered. Everett Ruiz was no ordinary wanderer. Born in 1914 inches Oakland, California, he grew up with an insatiable love of art and wilderness. By his late teens, he was already traveling alone through the deserts of the American Southwest, sketching landscapes, carving woodblocks, and writing letters that revealed both his literary talent and restless spirit. Friends described him as intense, idealistic, and utterly captivated by the wild places of the world. In the spring of 1934, Ruiz set out once more, this time toward the remote canyons and mesas of southern Utah. His letters home spoke of exhilaration. "As to when I shall revisit civilization, it will not be soon. I have not tired of the wilderness. Rather, I enjoy its beauty and the vagrant life I lead more keenly all the time." By November, he had reached the Escalante region, one of the most rugged and inaccessible landscapes in North America. deep sandstone canyons cut by the Colorado River, towering cliffs, and labyrinthine gulches made travel arduous. His last known letters, written to his family, radiated contentment. "I prefer the saddle to the streetcar and the star-sprinkled sky to a roof." After that, silence. Weeks later, searchers found his camp abandoned near Davis Gulch. His 2 burros were still alive, grazing nearby, their packs removed, supplies remained neatly stowed. There was no sign of a struggle, no footprints leading away, and no body. It was as though Roos had simply walked into the desert and vanished. Theories about his fate multiplied. Some believed he slipped while climbing and fell into one of the countless crevices or slot canyons, his remains hidden forever by rock and shifting sand. Others suggested he drowned in the Escalante River, swollen by autumn rains. Another possibility was foul play, that he encountered rustlers or outlaws who killed him and concealed the evidence. Yet no proof for any of these scenarios has ever surfaced. For decades, his disappearance became legend. His poetry and letters, later published, only deepened the mystique. To many, Ruiz came to symbolize the romantic ideal of youth surrendering to wilderness, a figure akin to later wanderers like Christopher McCandless. His words, brimming with awe and longing, seemed almost prophetic. "I have always been unsatisfied with life as most people live it. Always, I want to live more intensely and richly." In 1935, his family financed extensive searches, including local Navajo and Mormon ranchers familiar with the terrain. They scoured Davis Gulch and surrounding canyons but found nothing beyond the abandoned camp. Over the decades, occasional reports of human remains in the area sparked hope, but each proved inconclusive. A major twist came in 2009, when human bones discovered near Comb Ridge, Utah, were initially identified through DNA as belonging to Ruiz. The announcement made headlines worldwide. But months later, further testing revealed the remains were not his after all, reopening the mystery. Today, Ruiz's fate remains unknown. Some argue he simply succumbed to the desert he loved, his body hidden by nature's vastness. Others suspect murder, though no evidence points firmly that way. And a few romantics cling to the idea that he may have chosen to disappear deliberately, abandoning identity to live among remote canyons. Though this seems unlikely given the absence of later trace, what is certain is the legacy he left. Ruiz's writings, filled with luminous descriptions of desert light and solitude, continue to inspire readers. His disappearance transformed him from a young artist into a myth, the eternal wanderer who walked into the wild and never returned. And in the red rock canyons of Utah, where wind carves stone and silence stretches for miles, the question lingers. Did Everett Roos die by accident, by violence, or by choice? The skeleton lake of Rupkund, high in India's Himalayas, a glacial lake holds hundreds of skeletons, many dated to the 9th century. For decades, theories ranged from battle to epidemic. DNA tests suggest multiple groups died there centuries apart, raising even deeper questions. Rupkund lies at an altitude of 16,500 feet, nestled beneath the snow-capped peaks of Uttarakhand. For most of the year, the lake remains frozen, hidden beneath ice and snow. But during rare thaws, its waters reveal a haunting sight. Bones, skulls, and skeletal remains scattered along the shoreline. Locals had long known the place, weaving it into folklore as a cursed site haunted by ancestral spirits. When the lake first came to the attention of British surveyors in the 1942, the world learned of what would soon be called Skeleton Lake. Initial counts suggested as many as 300 skeletons lay within and around the lake. Many were remarkably well preserved by the cold, their bones still bearing evidence of flesh and hair when first exposed. Early theories abounded. Some believed the remains marked a tragic battle, warriors lost in combat at high altitude. Others suspected a sudden epidemic, a party of pilgrims or traders struck down en masse by disease. Still others pointed to landslides or avalanches, catastrophes common in the unforgiving Himalayas. Closer study in the 1,960 seconds and 70 seconds revealed a startling clue. Many of the skulls bore deep, round fractures, injuries consistent not with weapons but with blunt force trauma from above. The pattern suggested a deadly hailstorm, with balls of ice the size of cricket balls raining down on those caught in the open. Folklore from the region echoed this, telling of a goddess who smote trespassers with hailstones as hard as iron. For decades, the hailstorm theory stood as the leading explanation, but modern science has complicated the picture. In 2004, a team from India and Europe conducted radiocarbon dating on dozens of skeletons. The results pointed to a mass death around the 9th century CE, roughly 1,200 years ago, supporting the idea of a sudden calamity. Yet later, genetic analysis in 2019 revealed something even stranger. The remains did not belong to a single group or a single moment in time. Instead, DNA revealed at least 3 distinct populations, one of South Asian origin, another of Mediterranean ancestry, and a third from Southeast Asia. Even more puzzling, radiocarbon dates ranged widely, showing that groups had perished at the lake not only in the 9th century, but also as late as the 19th century. How could people from such distant places and centuries apart all end up dead in the same small glacial basin? One theory is that Rupkund was a pilgrimage site, its treacherous routes drawing travelers from across regions and centuries, many of whom never returned. Historical texts describe the Nanda Devi Raj Jat pilgrimage, a high-altitude ritual still observed today, which may have brought groups into the path of sudden storms or accidents. Yet questions remain. Why would Mediterranean individuals, possibly from distant Greece or Crete, based on genetic links, travel into the high Himalayas in the 19th century? How did so many perish in the exact same spot, without evidence of survival or burial? And why do injuries on some skeletons suggest hail, while others do not? The lake itself provides no easy answers. Each summer, as snow recedes, bones emerge anew from the ice, only to be buried again by winter. Trekkers who reach the site describe an eerie silence broken only by wind, the skeletons lying scattered as though abandoned in haste. Today, Rupkund remains a place of pilgrimage and research alike. Scientists continue to analyze isotopes, DNA, and injuries, hoping to untangle the overlapping tragedies that unfolded there. But the mystery endures. Etched into the frozen shoreline, hundreds of bones, spanning centuries, lying together in one small lake, as though Rupkund itself is a collector of the dead, keeping their stories hidden beneath its glacial waters. The vanished city of Helike. In 373 BCE, the Greek city of Helike sank into the sea after an earthquake and tsunami. Ancient writers compared it to Atlantis. For centuries, its ruins lay hidden, until modern archaeologists rediscovered traces beneath coastal sediments. Helike lay in the northern Peloponnese, near the Gulf of Corinth. Founded in the Bronze Age, it was a prosperous city, famed for its temples and coinage. At its heart stood a sanctuary to Poseidon Heliconios, god of the sea and earthquakes, a dedication that would prove bitterly ironic. By the 4th century BCE, Helike was the leading city of the Achaean League, its influence stretching across the region. But in the winter of 373 BCE, disaster struck. Ancient sources, including writers like Strabo, Pausanias, and Diodorus Siculus, describe a sudden earthquake, followed by a colossal wave from the Corinthian Gulf. In a single night, Helike was destroyed, buildings collapsed, the ground sank, and the sea surged inland, swallowing the city whole. By morning, nothing remained but a stretch of water where the city had once stood. Contemporaries were stunned. Helike was not a small settlement, but a thriving center of commerce and culture. The loss was catastrophic, its magnitude compared by later writers to the fate of mythical Atlantis. Aristotle, Plato's student, is said to have mentioned Helike's destruction as an example of how entire cities could vanish into the sea. For centuries afterward, fishermen told of ruins visible beneath the waves and of bronze statues of Poseidon glinting from the seabed. The event left a deep cultural scar. Ancient travelers reported that survivors abandoned the site, founding new towns inland. Yet Helike itself was gone, its remains covered by mud and seawater. Unlike other Greek cities that lived on in history, Helike became a ghost remembered only in stories, its exact location uncertain. For modern archaeologists, the challenge was immense. Was Helike truly beneath the sea, as legend suggested? Or had it been buried under river sediments? Scholars debated for decades, often fruitlessly. Expeditions scoured the Gulf of Corinth in the 19th and 20th centuries, searching the seabed for ruins, but none were found. A breakthrough came in the 1992 when Greek archaeologist Dora Katsanopoulou and her team began systematic surveys of the coastal plain near the village of Rizomailos. Using borehole cores and geomagnetic imaging, they discovered traces of ancient walls, pottery, and roads not underwater, but buried beneath layers of silt. These findings indicated that the earthquake had caused liquefaction, where waterlogged soils collapse, dragging entire structures downward. The tsunami that followed likely covered the ruins with sediments, entombing Helike inland rather than in the open Gulf. Excavations uncovered coins stamped with Poseidon's trident, fragments of temples, and domestic buildings dating to the classical period. Nearby, remnants of an older Bronze Age settlement hinted that the region had experienced cycles of destruction and renewal across millennia. The rediscovery confirmed that Helike was no myth, but a real city lost to geological catastrophe. Its fate illustrates how earthquakes and tsunamis have shaped the Mediterranean world and how easily thriving centers can vanish in hours. The parallels with Atlantis remain striking, a wealthy city destroyed in a single night by the sea. Remembered for centuries as a cautionary tale, yet questions linger. Were all of Helike's citizens killed in the disaster, or did some escape inland? How far did the tsunami reach? And why did ancient accounts emphasize ruins lying beneath the water when modern excavations place them under soil? Perhaps shifting coastlines and sedimentation altered the landscape so drastically that the truth blended with legend. Today, Helike's remains lie a few meters beneath farmland, where archaeologists continue to uncover streets and sanctuaries once buried for over 2,000 years. Standing there, among wheat fields and olive groves, one would never guess that a vanished city sleeps below a city once praised, destroyed in a single night, and reborn as myth. And so Helike endures, both real and legendary. A reminder that entire civilizations can be erased by earth and sea, leaving only silence and stories behind. The Devil's Sea disappearances. Off the coast of Japan lies the Dragon's Triangle, a counterpart to the Bermuda Triangle. Fishing vessels, military ships, and planes have vanished there for centuries. Japanese folklore speaks of sea dragons, but official reports list them only as unexplained. The Devil's Sea, also known as the Dragon's Triangle, is said to stretch between Japan, the Bonin Islands, and Guam, encompassing a patch of the Pacific infamous for strange vanishings. Its reputation dates back centuries. Japanese fishermen told stories of boats swallowed by whirlpools, sudden squalls that rose from calm seas, and creatures from the depths that dragged men under. Folklore blended these dangers into tales of Ryu, sea dragons whose domain lay in the treacherous waters. In the modern era, reports grew more troubling. During the early 20th century, Japanese naval records documented the loss of fishing vessels and patrol boats in this area without clear cause. The most infamous case came in 1952, when Japan dispatched the research vessel Kaiju Maru No. 5 to investigate. The ship carried over 30 crew and scientists. It never returned. Search parties later found only fragments of wreckage drifting on the waves. The government listed the cause as unknown. The disappearance was so unsettling that Japanese authorities temporarily declared the region a danger zone, warning vessels to avoid it. Newspapers began referring to it as the Ma no Umi, the Sea of the Devil. Comparisons with the Bermuda Triangle soon followed, as both areas seemed to devour ships and planes without leaving wreckage. Explanations, as always, range from the scientific to the speculative. Geologists point out that the Devil's Sea lies along the Pacific Ring of Fire, one of the most seismically active zones on Earth. Submarine earthquakes are common, and underwater volcanic activity can release sudden bursts of gas. Such eruptions can destabilize water density, reducing buoyancy and causing vessels to sink with little warning. Some researchers suggest this could explain the sudden losses of ships like the Kaio Maru No. 5. Others highlight the unpredictable weather patterns of the Pacific. The mixing of warm Kuroshio currents with colder northern waters can produce violent storms, fog banks, and rogue waves. In an age before advanced forecasting and satellite navigation, such phenomena could easily overwhelm small fishing vessels. Yet these rational explanations have not dispelled the mystery. Accounts describe ships found drifting with crews missing, planes that vanished from radar mid-flight, and compasses behaving erratically. Skeptics note that records are often fragmentary, with later retellings embellishing details. Still, the cumulative weight of so many unexplained incidents has made the Dragon's Triangle a place of enduring fascination. More speculative theories flourish in the gaps. Some writers propose electromagnetic anomalies, akin to those hypothesized in the Bermuda Triangle, disrupting instruments and communications. Others venture into the realm of legend. Perhaps the stories of sea dragons were rooted in sightings of giant squids, deep-sea creatures surfacing from the trench. And in modern popular culture, the Devil's Sea has even been tied to theories of time slips, dimensional rifts, or extraterrestrial bases hidden beneath the ocean floor. Despite the mystery, the area remains heavily trafficked today, as one of the world's busiest shipping routes. Cargo ships and fishing fleets traverse it daily without incident, suggesting that while dangers exist, they are neither constant nor supernatural. Still, the reputation lingers, and every unexplained loss renews the legend. The Devil's Sea occupies a peculiar space between documented tragedy and myth. Ships have vanished there, this much is fact. The reasons, however, dissolve into uncertainty, somewhere between geology, weather, and the imagination of seafarers. And so, just like its Atlantic twin, the Bermuda Triangle, the Dragon's Triangle, holds its secrets beneath restless waves, a reminder that even in the modern age, there are stretches of ocean where certainty drowns and mystery remains afloat. The strange echoes of Lake Baikal, the world's deepest lake, has long been a source of mystery. Soviet divers in the 1,980 seconds reported encounters with giant humanoid figures beneath the surface. Others speak of UFOs rising from its depths. To this day, strange lights and echoes are reported over Baikal's waters. Lake Baikal in Siberia is the largest freshwater lake by volume on Earth, and also the deepest, plunging to more than 5,300 feet. Its age is estimated at 25 million years, making it the oldest lake known. Ringed by mountains and forests, Baikal contains nearly 20% of the world's unfrozen freshwater, a body of water so vast and ancient it inspires reverence in locals who call it the Sacred Sea. But along with its natural grandeur, the lake has long been associated with unexplained phenomena. Folklore from the Buryat people, who live along its shores, tells of spirits dwelling in its depths. Fishermen for centuries spoke of lights glimmering beneath the water, of sudden storms rising from clear skies, and of strange booming sounds echoing across the surface. These stories were once regarded as superstition until the Soviet era brought accounts of far stranger events. In the 1,980 seconds, during Cold War military exercises, Soviet Navy divers conducting routine training reportedly encountered something extraordinary. At depths of around 150 feet, they claimed to see beings unlike any marine life known, giant humanoid figures, nearly 10 feet tall, wearing what appeared to be silvery suits or skin-tight coverings. The divers attempted to capture one of the figures with netting, but a sudden force drove them to the surface too quickly, resulting in decompression injuries. Official reports listed it as an accident, but whispers of the encounter circulated widely, becoming part of Baikal's lore. At the same time, the region was also noted for aerial anomalies. Soviet radar installations occasionally tracked unidentified objects, rising rapidly from the lake, then vanishing into the skies at impossible speeds. Pilots and locals alike described glowing orbs hovering above the water, then plunging back into the depths. The phenomenon became so common in reports that Baikal was quietly nicknamed Russia's Bermuda Triangle. Scientists, of course, offer natural explanations. Baikal sits on a rift zone where tectonic plates pull apart. This creates geothermal activity, including hot springs and gas seeps beneath the lake. Methane released from fissures can cause bubbles, strange noises, and even glowing effects when ignited by static charges. Seismic activity may also generate booming sounds or light phenomena in the atmosphere. As for the diver's tale, skeptics suggest misperception in the dim underwater light, combined with the effects of high-pressure hallucinations. Yet not all mysteries can be brushed aside. In 2009, Russian research teams investigating Baikal with submersibles captured unusual sonar echoes, objects rising and falling rapidly in the depths, with no clear biological or geological explanation. Locals continued to report lights moving under the ice in winter, sometimes followed by cracks and thunderous noises. Baikal's depth adds to the enigma. Much of its floor remains unmapped, and scientists estimate that only a fraction of its ecosystems are known. Unique species, such as the transparent Baikal oilfish or the freshwater Baikal seal, show how unusual life in the lake can be. Could other, undiscovered organisms account for the diver sightings? Or are these tales shaped by the human tendency to find patterns in the unknown? Today, Baikal attracts both researchers and those drawn by its mysteries. It is a UNESCO World Heritage Site, yet also a magnet for paranormal investigators. Some come seeking evidence of extraterrestrial bases beneath its waters. Others pursue the quieter mysteries of geology and biology. But the fact remains, Baikal continues to produce strange phenomena, booming echoes, darting lights, and unexplained sonar readings. Whether rooted in science, folklore, or something stranger, the sacred sea still guards secrets in its abyss. And as the waves lap against the Siberian shore, the question endures: are we glimpsing tricks of nature, or echoes of something that does not wish to be found? The mystery of Nan Madol, off the coast of Micronesia, lie stone ruins built atop coral reefs, covering over 200 acres. Nicknamed the Venice of the Pacific, its megalithic basalt structures were somehow transported without cranes or beasts of burden. No one knows how or why it was built. Nan Madol lies on the eastern shore of Pohnpei, one of the Caroline Islands in the Pacific Ocean. To approach by boat is to see a maze of islets, canals, and towering basalt walls rising straight from the sea. The ruins, spread across more than 90 artificial islets, are interconnected by tidal waterways, giving the impression of a city afloat on the water. At its height, Nan Madol may have been the political and ceremonial center of the Sodelur dynasty, which ruled the island for centuries. The construction itself defies easy explanation. The site consists of massive basalt logs, prismatic columns formed naturally by volcanic activity, some weigh up to 50 tons, stacked in crisscrossing patterns to form walls and platforms. Archaeologists estimate hundreds of thousands of these stones were transported to build Nan Madol. Yet the islanders of Pohnpei had no cranes, no pulleys, and no draft animals. How they moved and positioned such immense material remains one of the great puzzles of Pacific archaeology. Legends from Pohnpei tell of two brothers, sorcerers, who floated the stones through the air with magical chants. Oral histories say Nan Madol was built with the help of supernatural forces, its construction beyond ordinary human power. These myths, while poetic, highlight just how extraordinary the site must have seemed even to the descendants of its builders. Scientific estimates place the city's origins around the 12th or 13th century CE, though some structures may be older. Nan Madol became the seat of the Sodelur rulers, who centralized power over Pompey's clans. Within its basalt walls were temples, tombs, and dwellings for nobility. One massive complex, Nandawas, was built to house the tombs of Sodelur chiefs, its walls rising nearly 30 feet above the water. Life within Nan Madol was rigidly controlled. Commoners lived on the main island, while only priests, nobles, and rulers occupied the stone islets. Food and supplies were brought in by canoe. The canals served both practical and symbolic purposes, reinforcing the separation of rulers from the rest of the people. Yet despite this grandeur, Nan Madol was eventually abandoned. By the 16th century, the Sodelur dynasty had collapsed, replaced by new rulers who left the city to the encroaching jungle and tide. Why the city was deserted is still debated. Some scholars suggest the logistics of sustaining life in a waterbound city proved too difficult. Others point to rebellion against the Sodelur, whose rule was described as increasingly oppressive in oral histories. Earthquakes, rising seas, or simple overextension of resources may also have played a role. When European explorers first reached Pohnpei in the 19th century, they were astonished by the scale of the ruins. Early accounts compared Nan Madol to lost civilizations like Atlantis, fueling speculation that the site was evidence of advanced or forgotten technologies. Even today, some fringe theories suggest ancient voyagers or outside influences from Southeast Asia, or even beyond the Earth, must have aided in its construction. Archaeologists remain cautious but fascinated. While the basalt columns occur naturally nearby, the sheer organization required to transport and assemble them still raises questions. Experiments moving single stones with ropes and rafts suggest it was possible, but scaling such methods to thousands of blocks pushes the limits of what small island populations could achieve. Today, Nan Madol is a UNESCO World Heritage Site, yet it remains largely uninhabited, reclaimed by mangroves and tidal waters. Visitors describe an uncanny stillness, walls rising out of the sea, black stone gleaming in the sun, canals reflecting clouds in perfect silence. It feels both monumental and abandoned, as though the city belongs more to legend than history. Nan Madol is real, its stones heavy and unyielding. But the questions of how it was built, why it thrived, and why it was abandoned remain unanswered. A city on the sea, suspended between history and myth, still holding secrets in its tide-carved walls. The lost expedition of George de Long. In 1879, George de Long's ship Jeannette became trapped in Arctic ice. 2 years later, survivors attempted to march across the frozen seas. Most perished. Their journals, later found in the snow, described frostbite, starvation, and endless white horizons. George Washington de Long was a U.S. Navy officer, driven by the great 19th century dream to reach the North Pole. Backed by newspaper magnate James Gordon Bennett Jr., who had already financed Stanley's famous search for Livingstone in Africa, de Long set sail in July 1879 aboard the USS Jeannette. His plan was bold: to approach the pole through the Bering Strait, a route thought by some to conceal an open polar sea. The Jeannette was reinforced for ice, stocked with 3 years of provisions, and carried a crew of 33. Spirits were high as the ship pushed north, but by September 1879, it was locked fast in pack ice near Wrangel Island. What was meant to be a daring voyage quickly became a test of survival. For nearly 2 years, the Jeannette drifted helplessly with the ice, carried slowly westward across the Arctic Ocean. The crew endured crushing cold, months of darkness, and the gnawing uncertainty of when or if they would be released. De Long insisted on strict discipline, regular duties, daily prayers, and even lectures to keep morale from breaking. The men hunted polar bears and walruses when possible, supplementing dwindling rations with whatever the ice yielded. But in June 1881, disaster struck. The relentless pressure of the pack finally crushed the ship's hull. The Jeannette splintered and sank beneath the ice, leaving the crew stranded more than 700 miles from Siberia's coast. With only 3 lifeboats and what supplies they could salvage, they began the desperate trek across shifting ice floes. De Long's journals, later recovered, detail the grim march. Men pulled heavy sledges over jagged ridges, stumbling in temperatures well below freezing. Frostbite, blackened fingers and toes. Clothing froze stiff with ice. Some days they advanced only a mile or two, the floes splitting beneath them. Still, De Long drove them onward toward the distant Lena River Delta in Siberia, where they hoped to find rescue. By early September, after months of torment, the party reached open water and launched the lifeboats. One was lost in a storm, never seen again. The other 2 became separated. Chief Engineer George Melville's boat eventually reached safety, but De Long's group landed far to the north, deep in the desolate Lena Delta. Stranded and starving, they struggled to push inland. De Long's final journal entries are haunting in their simplicity. He wrote of men collapsing from exhaustion, of dwindling rations of mouldy biscuits, and of his determination to record each death. On the 30th of October 1881, his last words read, "Mr. Collins died during the night. As I look at him, I wonder who will be next, and when. God's will be done." Months later, Melville led rescue attempts into the Delta. In March 1882, he discovered the bodies of De Long and his companions, huddled together in the snow beside their journals. 11 men from his party had perished. Of the 33 who had set out aboard the Jeannette, only 13 ultimately survived. The expedition, though tragic, contributed valuable scientific data. The drift of the Jeannette proved that the Arctic pack ice moved continuously across the ocean, a finding later confirmed by explorers like Fridtjof Nansen. Yet, for all its scientific value, the story remains one of human endurance against overwhelming odds and the terrible cost of ambition. The Arctic had claimed another expedition, leaving behind not triumph, but pages of frozen words. A captain's last record of men lost in the white silence. The Alaskan Triangle, covering a vast area between Anchorage, Juneau, and Barrow, Alaska's wilderness, has seen hundreds of disappearances of planes, hikers, and hunters. Some vanish without wreckage or tracks, fueling legends of magnetic anomalies and hidden worlds. The so-called Alaskan Triangle spans nearly 200,000 square miles, an expanse larger than California. Its boundaries encompass snow-clad mountains, dense boreal forests, and tundra stretching to the Arctic. Within this wilderness, an unsettling number of people have simply disappeared. Aircraft vanishing from radar, hunters leaving no footprints, even entire search teams failing to return. The mystery came to national attention in October 1972 when a twin-engine Cessna carrying U.S. Congressman Hale Boggs and Alaska's Congressman Nick Begich vanished en route from Anchorage to Juneau. Despite one of the largest search operations in American history, involving 40 military aircraft and dozens of boats, no wreckage was ever found. The case remains open, its absence of evidence fueling suspicions of something more than mechanical failure. But this was only one case among many. Since the 1,952nd, the state has reported an average of 500 to 1,000 disappearances per year, ranging from small aircraft to hikers and villagers. Alaska's rugged landscape makes rescue difficult, with storms, avalanches, and sudden temperature drops complicating searches. Yet even accounting for the dangers, the sheer number of unresolved vanishings stands out. Explanations range from the scientific to the supernatural. Some geologists note that Alaska sits atop a web of fault lines, where earthquakes and geothermal activity can cause sudden ground shifts, landslides, and crevasses. Aircraft navigation is also challenged by magnetic anomalies, where compasses deviate due to the proximity of the magnetic North Pole. Pilots have reported erratic readings, contributing to disorientation in storms or whiteouts. Others point to environmental hazards. Vast stretches of Alaska are uninhabited, with forests and mountains capable of concealing wreckage for decades. Even a large aircraft can vanish amid the terrain, buried under snow or lost in glacial ice. Wildlife and weather erase tracks quickly, leaving searchers with nothing but empty wilderness. Yet folklore clings to the mystery. Indigenous legends long described men in the mountains or Tlingit spirits that lured travelers away. Some stories tell of portals, hidden gateways to other realms within the triangle. In modern times, these legends have merged with speculation about UFOs, time slips, and parallel worlds. Witnesses have reported strange lights moving silently over valleys, and hunters tell of encountering sudden walls of fog that seem to distort sound and distance. The idea of hidden worlds has particular resonance because of the sheer number of unexplained disappearances with no wreckage recovered. While skeptics argue that remoteness and weather alone explain this, believers see something stranger at work. Theories range from electromagnetic vortexes disrupting aircraft instruments to interdimensional rifts concealed within Alaska's vast wilderness. What complicates matters is the persistence of new cases. In recent decades, modern aircraft equipped with GPS and emergency transmitters have still gone missing, their signals abruptly cutting off. Search crews find no debris fields, no emergency beacons, no survivors. The triangle's reputation grows with each loss. To this day, Alaska maintains one of the highest per capita rates of disappearances in the United States. Government rescue agencies treat the region as among the most dangerous for travel, cautioning pilots and hikers alike. Still, thousands enter its wilderness each year, drawn by its beauty, and perhaps also by the enduring mystery it holds. Is the Alaskan Triangle simply the product of geography vast, hostile, and merciless? Or does it conceal something stranger, as folklore and speculation suggest? In the silence of snowbound valleys and endless skies, the truth remains hidden. Planes vanish, tracks fade, and legends grow, leaving the Alaskan Triangle as one of the modern world's last great enigmas. The Skeleton Tower of Cahokia. In Illinois, excavations of the ancient Cahokia mounds revealed a timber circle aligned with the solstices. Nearby, mass graves held young women, many sacrificed. The combination of astronomy, ritual, and death suggests Cahokia's power ran deeper than once believed. Cahokia, located near modern-day St. Louis, was the largest pre-Columbian city north of Mexico. At its height, around 1,200 CE, it covered more than 6 square miles, with a population perhaps reaching 20,000 people, larger than many European cities of the same era. Dozens of earthen mounds rose above plazas and neighborhoods. Dominated by Monk's Mound, a massive platform larger in base area than the Great Pyramid of Giza. Excavations beginning in the 1960s revealed that Cahokia was more than just an urban settlement. It was a center of ritual and cosmic order. Among its most striking features was a circle of large timber posts, rebuilt several times in slightly different positions. Archaeologists dubbed it Woodhenge for its resemblance to Stonehenge in Britain. From the central post, alignments pointed to the rising sun on solstices and equinoxes, marking the calendar for agriculture and ceremony. It suggested Cahokia's rulers organized time itself, binding political power to celestial cycles. Yet the same excavations uncovered darker aspects of that power. Near Mound 72, archaeologists found elaborate burials, including one central grave containing a man cloaked in a blanket of more than 20,000 shell beads arranged in the shape of a falcon. Around him lay sacrificed retainers, men without heads, women arranged in rows, bodies stacked in pits. One mass grave contained more than 50 young women, many showing signs of ritual killing. These discoveries shocked researchers. Cahokia, long thought to be primarily a trading hub, now appeared as a theocratic state where human sacrifice reinforced authority. The link between Woodhenge and the sacrificial burials suggested that celestial events such as solstices, may have been paired with offerings of blood and life. The skeleton tower of mass burials spoke to a worldview where astronomy, religion, and death were inseparable. The young women in particular raise haunting questions. Why were they chosen? Were they captives taken in war? Or local subjects offered to ensure fertility of crops and stability of rulers? Analysis of their bones suggests they were well nourished, perhaps selected for their health, which would lend symbolic power to their deaths. But without written records, the reasons remain speculative. The combination of precision astronomy and ritual sacrifice underscores Cahokia's sophistication and complexity. This was no village culture. It was a city that organized thousands of people for construction, ritual, and governance. Its influence radiated across the Mississippi Valley, with evidence of Cahokian artifacts found hundreds of miles away. Yet by 1350 CE, Cahokia was abandoned. Its mounds remained, but its people and their practices faded into silence. Explanations for the city's collapse vary. Environmental degradation, deforestation, floods from the Mississippi, or internal social unrest. The memory of its rituals, however, endured in oral traditions among descendant native nations, many of whom recall Cahokia as a place of both great power and danger. Today, the site is preserved as a UNESCO World Heritage Site, visited by archaeologists and tourists alike. Standing at Woodhenge during the equinox, one can still see the sun rise in alignment with the ancient posts, casting long shadows toward Monk's Mound. It is a reminder that Cahokia's people lived by the rhythms of sky and earth, and that their rituals bound those rhythms with sacrifice. The skeletons unearthed in Mound 72 Whisper of Lives Cut Short offered to forces their society believed greater than themselves. And though centuries have passed, the silence of the graves lingers, leaving us to wonder what blend of belief, necessity, and fear drove Cahokia's rulers to build their power upon both stars and bones. The HMS Terror's final silence. Part of Franklin's lost expedition, the HMS Terror was trapped in ice in 1848. When its wreck was finally discovered in 2016, much of it was eerily intact. Cabins still sealed, plates stacked neatly, and glass unbroken. Yet the question remains, why did the crew abandon a ship so well preserved? The Franklin expedition, launched in 1845, was one of the most ambitious Arctic ventures of its era. Two reinforced Royal Navy ships, HMS Erebus and HMS Terror, carried 129 men under the command of Sir John Franklin, tasked with charting the final passage of the Northwest Passage. Stocked with provisions for 3 years, equipped with steam engines, and outfitted with iron-plated bows, the vessels were considered the most advanced polar ships of their day. Yet both would vanish into the Arctic wilderness, becoming one of the greatest mysteries in maritime history. By 1848, records show that both ships had become trapped in pack ice off King William Island, in what is now Nunavut, Canada. A note later found in a cairn revealed that Franklin had died, and the remaining crew had abandoned the ships, attempting a desperate march south. None survived. For more than a century and a half, the fate of the ships themselves was unknown, their disappearance spawning theories of starvation, scurvy, lead poisoning, and even cannibalism among the crew. The wreck of HMS Erebus was found in 2014, followed by HMS Terror 2 years later, resting upright in Terror Bay. What startled archaeologists was the condition of the Terror. Unlike most wrecks crushed by ice or waves, it lay astonishingly well preserved, its timbers intact, its masts still standing, and its decks largely unbroken. The cold, dark waters of the Arctic had acted as a natural preservative, sealing the ship in a kind of frozen time capsule. Exploration of the wreck revealed scenes of eerie stillness. Glass panes in the captain's cabin were unshattered. Plates remained stacked neatly in cupboards. A desk sat undisturbed. Drawers closed. Doors were sealed, hinting at interiors untouched since the day the crew walked away. Unlike wrecks ravaged by storm or battle, the Terror seemed to have been left in orderly condition, abandoned deliberately, not destroyed. This raised the central enigma. Why leave such a well-preserved ship? If the Terror remained intact and seaworthy, why did the crew decide to march across one of the most hostile landscapes on Earth, knowing the odds of survival were slim? One explanation is shifting ice. The ship may have been immobilized, locked fast in a grip so unyielding that escape by sea seemed impossible. Another theory points to morale. After years trapped, disease spreading, and food running low, the men may have concluded that marching south offered their only hope. Archaeological evidence from the crew's abandoned camps suggests starvation, exposure, and possible cannibalism, underscoring how desperate their final journey became. Yet the condition of the Terror leaves troubling questions. Some suggest the crew may have intended to return, leaving the ship provisioned but temporarily deserted. Others wonder if unknown factors, perhaps mechanical failure, flooding, or unseen damage, forced their decision. The Arctic, silent and vast, offers no clear answers. For the Inuit of the region, the ships were never entirely lost. Oral histories describe encounters with abandoned vessels trapped in ice and stories of desperate Europeans marching south. These accounts, long overlooked, proved essential in guiding modern searchers to the wreck sites, affirming the depth of indigenous knowledge. Today, HMS Terror rests beneath frigid waters, a museum of absence. Its sealed cabins may yet contain journals, instruments, or preserved food that could offer new insights. For now, it remains a monument to human ambition and human frailty, a ship that outlasted its crew, standing silent while its men perished on the ice. The final silence of the Terror lingers, as if the ship itself still waits in the Arctic twilight. Preserved, but not explained. Found, but not yet fully understood.